Chapter 13:22. The commotion next door didn't affect Meg and the rest's mood as they ate their barbecue. However, Meg was also amazed by their neighbor's iron rod and fist education method. Luckily, that silly child could take a beating. After being urged a few times, Ivan still asked Meg, who was grilling meat, shamelessly, then, "Neighbor, are you planning to open a restaurant?" "Yes, we're preparing to open for business tomorrow," Meg replied with a smile. Then are the grilled crayfish for sale?" Ivan asked hesitantly. Meg shook his head and said, "I don't think the grilled crayfish is for sale anymore. However, I'm opening a crayfish restaurant, and I'll be releasing crayfish of all flavors tomorrow. If you're interested, you can come and take a look tomorrow." It seemed like this neighbor was already captivated by the grilled crayfish. Perhaps he could even become the restaurant's first customer, which was very important to the restaurant. "Oh, I see. All right, our family will definitely come tomorrow." Ivan nodded before retracting his head. "Whether it's really effective or not, we'll know when we try it tomorrow," Ivan said to Jemina. Crayfish of all flavors. Justin had already started to drool. Howl. A howl sounded in the sky above Carapace Island at night. "It's here." Meg, who was reading in the study, got up and went to the balcony when he heard the sound. A black shadow circled in the sky, and quickly found Meg's aura. It swooped down toward the restaurant, hovered 3 meters above the restaurant, and stuck its head down to rub against Meg's face. "RZ, you really know the way." Meg patted RZ's head with a smile. He told RZ that he was going to Carapace Island the night before they set off, but he didn't expect it to really fly here today. "Little RZ, why are you here?" Irina walked out in her pajamas and asked RZ with a smile. RZ quickly hid behind Meg and frantically tried to please Irina through Meg. "Come here, let me touch your head." Irina waved at it. "Howl." RZ looked at Meg for help. Meg shrugged his shoulders. What else could he do? Even if Irina wanted to pat his head, he had to obediently stretch his head out. Woo tilde. RZ reluctantly put its furry head in front of Irina. "It's so soft and warm." Irina reached out her hands and rubbed RZ's head, a happy smile on her face. RZ, on the other hand, rolled her eyes and looked as if she had nothing to live for. "Little RZ, I want to rub the dog's head too, I want to rub it too." Amy had also come upstairs at some point. She looked at RZ's furry head and said while jumping up and down, "Come, let's do it together." Irina lifted Amy up and gently placed her on Z's neck. Amy hugged RZ's neck and pressed her face against it. She smiled and said, "Little RZ is so warm, just like a big stove." Meow, meow tilde. Ugly duckling looked up at the huge purple-striped griffin with curiosity in its eyes. It looked back at its back, and was a little disappointed when it didn't have the same pair of wings. Irina and Amy only let go of RZ's head after they were done playing with each other. RZ lowered its head and stared at Ugly Duckling. It sniffed it with its nose, and then stared at the little wing-like fur on its back for a while. Suddenly, it sneered. Meow. Ugly Duckling felt humiliated, and meowed sternly. However, its voice was still a little childish. RZ laughed even more happily, revealing 2 rows of sharp, white teeth. Meow, meow, meow tilde. Ugly Duckling shrugged its back and tried to make itself fly. However, apart from its ridiculous posture, its body still stood firmly on the ground. "Ugly Duckling, you're too fat. Your wings can't let you fly anymore." Amy squatted down and touched the 2 little wings on Ugly Duckling's back. She smiled and said, "When can these wings grow out? I really like to eat wing tips." Ugly Duckling and RZ looked at Amy at the same time with fear in their eyes. "It's all right. I'm not going to eat you guys yet," Amy consoled them. Ugly Duckling and RZ backed off at the same time. This was even scarier. "Go and play. Don't go too far, and don't get discovered. Come and find us at night. I'll prepare something delicious for you." Meg smiled and patted RZ's head. Howl. RZ meowed happily and flapped its wings to leave. Ugly Duckling looked up at RZ's departing figure with a little envy in its eyes. "Let's go. It's time for us to sleep." Meg watched RZ leave before bringing Irina and the others downstairs to sleep. Lying on the bed, Meg closed his eyes and calmed himself down very quickly. Then, he pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. Challenge it, crayfish. Host, please complete the mission of cutting the back of 100 crayfish within 10 seconds, and ensure that the crayfish meat is intact and the cut is continuous. Countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. As soon as Meg entered the test field for the god of cookery, the system's voice sounded, followed by crayfish flying all over the sky. Meg, who was still in a daze, didn't even have time to pick up the kitchen knife before the crayfish were already hanging all over his body. There were even 2 crawling on his face and trying to pinch his ears with their big pincers, but he cut off their pincers. Challenge failed. The countdown ended, and the system's voice also sounded. System, what the hell is this? Meg said with a frown as he swept the crayfish off his body. Wasn't this messing with him? Cutting the back of the crayfish is a very important step in the cooking of crayfish. How to cut the back of the crayfish elegantly without harming the meat itself is a perfect example of the perfect combination of artistry and technique. If the host wants to learn how to cook crayfish, he must first master the technique of cutting the back of the crayfish, the system replied. Then you should at least let me practice first. Who can stand to be covered with crayfish the moment I come in? Meg refused. Increasing the speed of cutting the back of the crayfish was something Meg agreed with. This was related to whether he could supply a large amount of crayfish. The second round of the challenge will begin immediately. Host, please get ready. Countdown, 10, 9. The system ignored Meg's words, and the second round of crayfish attacked again. Meg immediately raised the kitchen knife, and with his fast, accurate, and ruthless knife skills, he successfully cut the 100 crayfish into half. Challenge failed. The third round of the challenge begins. Challenge failed. Challenge failed. When the tip of the knife cuts across the back of the crayfish, I can feel the position of every joint on the shell. I know what kind of force I should use to cut open the shell. However, this process is less than 0.1 seconds. Ordinary people can't see what I did during this process. All you can see is a crayfish whose shell was perfectly cut open. The cut on the shell is smooth, and the meat is not damaged at all. Of course, you can't imagine how many crayfish died under my knife in order to do all this. Autobiography of the Master Chef. Chapter 1323. Who is it? Which bastard stole my idol? Under the moonlight, Alfred's eyes were bloodshot as he howled at the sky on the messy island. There was no trace of the statue in the crater. Alfred walked around the island and his gaze fell on the charred body of the 3-headed demon dog. He walked up to it and examined it carefully. He gritted his teeth and said, "Flaming demon tribe, I won't let you off easily. Only I deserve the power of the undead god. The statue will be reconstructed in 3 days. Before that, I have to snatch it back and complete the rest of the ceremony," Alfred said in a deep voice. Alfred said in a low voice as he summoned his flying mount. "It seems that I have to take some men to Inferno Island. They must have been ordered by Terry to come and steal from my Abyssal Island's territory." Alfred bent down and punched the ground. The entire island trembled and collapsed, sinking to the bottom of the sea. Emergency mission. Host, please kill the base destroyer, Alfred, within 3 days. Mission success. Receive the title of Base Guardian and a chance to ask a secret question. Mission failure. Host will lose the supply of all ingredients from the base. Meg had just completed the 10-second open-back mission of 100 crayfish when the system's voice suddenly sounded in the test field for the god of cookery. Meg was dumbfounded. This mission came out of nowhere. Did he have to accept missions from the system in the test field for the god of cookery? System, what the hell is a base destroyer? And what's a secret question? Meg put down the kitchen knife and asked with a frown. Alfred destroyed the island's structure with brute force, causing the island to collapse. It had a great impact on the crayfish breeding base's water quality and environment, destroying the ecosystem that the system had painstakingly built. 4 base destroyers like this, the system must eliminate them to prevent them from causing more serious damage to other bases, the system replied. Looks like he noticed that the statue is gone, Meg said thoughtfully. With the host's current authority, You don't have the right to know some secret information on this continent. However, after completing this mission, the system will provide you with a chance to ask a question. Knowledge is priceless. Then I'll change this chance to 100 copper coins. No. Look, this opportunity isn't even worth 100 coppers. Meg curled his lips. The system, you want me to kill a level 10 powerhouse, yet you're not willing to show me any sincerity. System, you're getting cocky, aren't you? Do you still remember who Daddy is? Host, please respect this system, the system said sternly. I don't care. Anyway, I can't beat him. Unless you give me a chance to return to my peak, otherwise, you want Dad to die. You can do whatever you want. Also, if you don't want to sell your vegetables to me, I'll buy them from someone else. There are so many people who grow vegetables in this world. You're not the only one. Meg said indifferently. Host, you are a scoundrel. What kind of host are you? Is there anyone who threatens the system like you? Do you know how the industry is laughing at me now? Oh, there's a circle. How do they laugh at you? Tell me and make me laugh. Meg said with great interest. The system was silent for a long time and said in a low voice, mission success reward weighted. The mobile restaurant can obtain a protective shield that is immune to all attacks below level 9 and can withstand 3 level 10 attacks. Mission failure punishment, obliterate the host. You didn't go to ask for help in your circle of friends just now, did you? Meg raised his eyebrows. This punishment style didn't seem like the system's style. How did you know? The system was shocked, but it stopped in time. It coughed softly and said, the 3-day countdown has begun. Host, please complete the mission as soon as possible. After that, it went completely silent. Meg thought for a while. Alfred was also on his kill list, and he was also Irina's target. Although the system's mission was a little sudden, it was not completely impossible to complete it within 3 days. The increase in the mobile restaurant's defensive ability was indeed very attractive to him. It was equivalent to having an impenetrable fortress. Even if it was a sneak attack from a level 10 powerhouse, it would give them enough time to react. It was quite practical. Looks like the assassination plan has to be pushed forward a little. Meg whispered to himself as he walked to the big pot at the side. He threw the mission to the back of his mind first, and began to practice how to make a delicious braised crayfish. Braised crayfish, spicy crayfish, steamed crayfish, garlic crayfish, 13 spice crayfish, iced crayfish. Every cooking method was a new challenge for Meg. However, Meg, who had been honed for a long time, was no longer the rookie who had no understanding of cooking. He had his own understanding of the control of the fire and the amount of spices and seasonings. The various methods were just like playing a game, and the sense of accomplishment was equally great. Congratulations, host. The supreme grade iced crayfish has been achieved. Meg opened his eyes, and the alarm clock at the bedside was ringing. After waking up for a while, Meg reached out to turn off the alarm clock. He shook his head, and chased the crayfish out of his head. He sat up and rested for a while before regaining his strength. Although it was only one night, Meg, who was in the test field for the god of cookery, had already spent over 100 days and nights. Learning the 6 cooking methods of crayfish in one go, and perfecting each one to perfection, was also a huge test for Meg. Luckily, he got more and more familiar with the crayfish, and walked out of the test field for the god of cookery at daybreak. It's a pity to do all 6 methods, and it's time-consuming and not suitable for expansion. Meg pondered for a while, and softly murmured to himself, then, let's make spicy crayfish, garlic crayfish, and 13 spice crayfish. Meg couldn't stay on Carapace Island for the rest of his life, but to avoid trouble, he couldn't make the same crayfish flavor in a short period of time after he returned to Chaos City. Leaving the 3 flavors for Mammoth to make was obviously a good choice. I'll have to go to the harbor to collect crayfish after breakfast. I wonder if those fishermen went to catch crayfish. Meg got out of bed, washed up, and went downstairs to make breakfast. To the fishermen on Carapace Island, this morning was a little special compared to the past. This was because there were several large red prawns in the wooden barrels in front of them. They stretched their necks and looked in the direction of the island. Their expressions were somewhat anxious and somewhat expectant. "Old man, you didn't pretend to be us with that fellow yesterday, right?" A young fisherman with 2 dark circles under his eyes asked the old fisherman, Tucker, as he held onto a big net that was filled with crayfish. There were more than 50 crayfish in it. "It's also my first time meeting that lord. Why would I pretend to be you? I was hoping that he would come today so that I could give these crayfish to him," Tucker said with annoyance. There were also 10-odd crayfish in his wooden bucket. Chapter 13:24. Because of a piece of news that spread like wildfire, many fishermen on Carapace Island didn't have a good night's sleep last night. Today, the tide had just receded, and the sky was still dark, but many fishermen had already rushed to the beach with torches to search for the dark green prawns that they had avoided previously. The price of 50 copper coins per prawn was already higher than most sea fishes and crabs. Just 1 prawn was enough for a family to live on for a day. If they could catch a few more, they would have enough money to buy the amulets for the month. One had to know that this kind of strange prawns had appeared quite frequently on the beach of Carapace Island recently. Therefore, every fisherman had caught quite a number of prawns in their buckets, and they were anxiously waiting for that mysterious demon to come and purchase them. If the news was fake, then their efforts this morning would have been in vain. Meg made breakfast with love for Amy and Irina calmly. Without him calling them, the 3 little gluttonous kittens had already been lured down from upstairs by the aroma. After breakfast, Meg suddenly remembered that he hadn't named the restaurant yet, so the family of 3 started a discussion about the name of the restaurant. "Let's call it IE Restaurant." Irina threw out a name as soon as the discussion started. "I think it sounds pretty good. IE. It's so cute. I like this name." Amy raised her little hand in agreement. "Meow." Ugly Duckling also raised its little paw in agreement. "Seems like I'm a man who doesn't deserve a name." Meg shrugged with a smile. The name of the restaurant was decided just like that. The system very efficiently custom-made a signboard and hung it at the door. "Let's go to the harbor to collect the crayfish. IE Crayfish Restaurant is officially opening today." Meg carried Amy, straightened her 2 pincers, and walked towards the entrance of the restaurant. "We're just going to sell crayfish here. Aren't we going to do anything else?" Irina asked as she walked beside Meg. "Let's go and kill Alfred in 2 days, Meg said with a smile. "That's interesting." Irina's eyes lit up, and she was instantly interested. Meg smiled and shook his head. What a restless woman. When they passed by an alley, Meg and the others happened to see an ugly demon pressing a thin and weak female demon to the ground. The single-horned female demon, who looked to be only 13 or 14 years old, struggled desperately, but still had no way to break free from the demon's claws. In the distance, several demons were just coldly watching this scene, and some were even laughing and watching the play. "This is why I hate Carapace Island. These people are no different from wild beasts." Irina frowned slightly before kicking a flat and round rock on the ground. The stone flew into the alley, penetrating the head of the demon who was pressing down the single-horned female demon, and then circling around, cutting the throats of the demons who were watching the show. "They do deserve to die." Meg reached out to block Amy's eyes, and the 3 of them passed by the alley. This kind of thing was very common on Carapace Island. Demons who didn't have the money to buy amulets could only become the vassals or prey of other demons. The single-horned demon girl was stunned when she saw the demon who suddenly collapsed on top of her. Hot blood sprayed onto her delicate face, and the strong smell of blood made her come back to her senses. She pushed that demon away in disgust and looked at the 6 or 7 demons who had collapsed in the alley. Blood gushed out from their throats as they covered their necks with their hands, and their eyes were filled with despair. The demon girl, Jane, was completely frightened. She staggered to the entrance of the alley, but after running a few steps, she stopped again and looked back at the amulet hanging on the waist of the demon who had wanted to violate her. After hesitating for a while, Jane walked back quickly. She squatted down and took off the amulet to hang on her waist. Then, she tore off a piece of cloth to cover her face. She jogged out of the alley and quickly turned into the alley next door. She staggered as she ran in the alley, as if she didn't feel anything even when her bare feet were cut open. She didn't know who saved her, But she knew that if the Ten Kings Palace found out that she had something to do with the deaths of these people, she wouldn't be far from death. She might have to experience something even more terrifying than death. The fishermen at the harbor were waiting anxiously. Many demons had already planned to throw away these prawns and go to the seaside to take a look before the tide rose. Otherwise, they would have come for nothing today. Tucker also had a worried look on his face. Although he had already received 5 gold coins from the Lord yesterday, everyone had only caught the prawns after seeing him sell them. If the Lord hadn't come, perhaps they would have vented their anger on him. He's here. He's here. The young demon at the side suddenly stood up, and his eyes lit up when he saw Meg walking over from afar. He's here. Hearing the commotion, the other fisherman also stood up. Meg looked at the fishermen on both sides of the harbor who stood up one after another as if they were welcoming him. He was a little shocked. Are these guys trying to cause trouble? Irina's eyes lit up. Although they were all small fish and prawns, there were so many of them that it would be good for them to exercise their muscles. Should we use fireballs? Or do you want to smash it with a stick? Remi asked. Calm down, they're just ordinary crayfishes. Meg quickly stopped the two who were about to attack. He had already noticed that the barrels and nets in front of these fishermen were mostly filled with crayfish. Lord, you're finally here. These are the crayfish I caught today to repay the money I owed you yesterday, Tucker said gratefully as he walked to Meg with his wooden barrel. Today's harvest is not bad. Meg counted. There were a total of 15 crayfish in the wooden barrel, and the barrel was almost full. He took out 25 silver coins from his money pouch and handed it to Tucker. No need. You helped me a lot yesterday. These extra crayfish are my thanks. Tucker quickly waved his hand. The 2 crayfish yesterday were your thanks. Today's 5 crayfish are 50 copper coins each, so it's a total of 25 silver coins. You have to accept it. Meg shook his head and smiled. This is a long-term business. You can sell me the crayfish you catch in the future. Tucker hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take the silver coins. He bowed to Meg gratefully and said, "Thank you." In just one night, he had earned more money than he could earn in a month in the past. His hand holding the silver coins was trembling slightly. The fishermen who were still doubtful at first saw the silver coins Tucker received, and their eyes lit up one after another. "Sir, look at these crayfish I caught. There's a total of 52 crayfish. If you want them all, I'll give you the price of 50 crayfish." The young fisherman Qatar came up with a big net of crayfish and looked at Meg excitedly. Meg looked at the crayfish in the net. They were quite energetic, and 52 crayfish was enough. He nodded and said, "Okay, 50 copper coins each. I'll take them all." All the fishermen were in an uproar. 50 crayfish for 50 copper coins each. That was 2,500 copper coins. This was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for these fishermen who were struggling to make ends meet. All the demons looked at Meg with their eyes lit up. Qatar took the 25 gold coins from Meg with a glowing face. This was the money he usually earned in a month. He didn't expect to earn it in one night. Happiness came too quickly. He held the gold coins up and down, and his mind was in a daze. Then Meg bought all the crayfish from the rest of the fishermen. He filled 2 specially made nets that he brought with him, and there were about 300 crayfish in them. Ding! Detected 2 seedling prawns. Crayfish capture mission progress, 2-100. The system notification sounded in Mag's head. Chapter 1325. Meg's eyes lit up. He didn't expect that there would be 2 breeding crayfish among the crayfish caught by the demon fishermen. It was a pleasant surprise. The most crucial part of the crayfish catching mission was to catch the 100 breeding crayfish. If they could catch all the breeding crayfish in advance, they wouldn't need to catch all 300,000 crayfish to complete the mission. I will purchase the crayfish at 50 copper coins per crayfish long term. If you catch any crayfish, send them directly to my restaurant. I will purchase them at 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. every day. I won't accept them at any other time. The address of the restaurant. Meg told the fisherman the location of the restaurant. Considering the time and effort required to go back and forth to the port to purchase the crayfish every day, he decided to let the fishermen deliver the crayfish themselves. The fishermen didn't have any objections to this. After receiving the money, they only wanted to hurry to the beach to continue looking for crayfish. The price of 50 copper coins per crayfish was enough to make the fishermen go crazy. Meg found a tall and strong demon to help carry the 300-plus crayfish back. He only needed to pay 20 copper coins. Irina looked at Meg, who was pouring the crayfish into the big pond at the corner of the courtyard, and asked, "Are you going to start selling crayfish at noon today?" "Yes. I reckon there will be an endless stream of crayfish coming. If we don't do it now, we won't be able to hold it." Meg nodded. 300 crayfish occupied half of the pond. After all, each crayfish weighed 2 catties. "Can you handle it by yourself?" Irina was a little doubtful. After all, there were so many waiters at Mammoth. "That's a problem." Meg was slightly taken aback as he looked at Irina. "I have never served anyone before. I'm afraid that I won't be able to resist taking action once they open their mouth." Irina said calmly, "But if you think I can, I don't mind giving it a try." "Forget it. You can just be the lady boss who collects money." Meg quickly rejected. With Irina's temper, if she were to take action, the restaurant would most likely be stained with blood, and the business wouldn't be able to continue. "Hey, what's that?" Amy, who was running around in the courtyard with Ugly Duckling, suddenly pointed to a rock garden in another corner of the courtyard. Meg and Irina looked over at the same time, and the corner of their clothes that was exposed from behind the rock immediately shrank back. "Come out," Irina ordered coldly. After a moment of silence, a thin and weak figure stood up from the rockery. He was wearing a tattered black gown, and his face was covered with an irregular piece of black cloth. His clothes were stained with blood, and his hands were covered with mud. He was holding a sharp stone, and his whole body was trembling slightly. "She is." Meg looked at the single-horned demon girl, feeling that she was a little familiar. "What are you doing here?" Irina coldly asked as she looked at the single-horned demon. Her gaze was also somewhat surprised. Wasn't this the demon girl she had coincidentally saved in the morning? Jane looked at Irina, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by amazement. What a beautiful demoness! She had never seen such a beautiful demon before. Even the most beautiful succubus wasn't 1/10 as beautiful as this big sister. However, she quickly came back to her senses and realized her current situation. Barging into someone else's house was punishable by death on Carapace Island. The Ten Kings Palace wouldn't care about the life and death of someone like her who had no status and wasn't from a powerful tribe. After the incident in the morning, she had been running around in a panic. When she reached the vicinity, she happened to meet the Ten Kings Palace's patrol team. In her panic, she hid in the courtyard. She had planned to leave immediately after the patrol team left, but she did not expect the owner of the house to return and discover her. I am Jane, a single-horned demon. I accidentally barged into your courtyard and offended you. I promise I have no ill intentions, please forgive my sins," Jane said as she lowered her head. The rock in her hand was still tightly clenched. If someone wanted to kill her, she had to at least put up a fight. "You killed the demons?" Irina looked at her and asked coldly. I didn't." Jane's face turned pale instantly. She looked at Irina's cold gaze, shook her head, and said with a sobbing tone, "I didn't kill them. They wanted to violate me. I don't know who killed them. I didn't see his face, but I am very grateful to him. He saved me. It's her." Meg then recalled that this demon girl was the one that Irina saved in the morning. However, he only took a quick glance at her in the morning and didn't take a closer look. He didn't expect to see her again at home. Is killing a few demon scum something to be alarmed about? So what if you killed them? A smile appeared on Irina's face as she looked at Jane with interest. This little girl was rather interesting. Although she was pitifully weak, she wasn't an ungrateful demon. But they all had protective amulets on them. If the Ten Kings Palace found out, they wouldn't let me off, even if I didn't kill them, Jane said fearfully. To her, the Ten Kings Palace was the most terrifying and powerful force in this world. A bastard protected by a bastard. So what if you killed them? Irina shook her head. She looked at Jane and said, "Take off the cloth on your face and let me see." Jane wasn't used to Irina's words. The Ten Kings Palace was the absolute ruler of Carapace Island, but this beautiful big sister wasn't afraid of them at all. However, she had an inexplicable sense of trust when she looked at Irina. She hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take off the rags tied around her face. Her face was covered in blood, and there were a few small wounds, but one could still see her delicate facial features. Her medium-length silver-grey hair was also covered in blood, and there was a light golden horn in the middle of her forehead. It was about 5 centimeters long, and there was a golden-pink spiral on it. It looked very delicate. "How old are you?" Irina asked. 13. "Is there anyone else at home?" "My mother passed away 10 days ago. I don't have any relatives. Are you nimble?" "I'm very fast at picking up seashells." "Faster than anyone else." Irina nodded in satisfaction. "Then," she said, "very good. Then you can stay. From today onwards, you're an employee of our restaurant. We'll let you stay here, give you food, and pay you a salary." Jane and Meg were both stunned. "Stay? Let me stay, and even give me food and a salary?" Jane looked at Irina and felt that she had heard wrongly. Not only was this beautiful big sister not going to pursue her mistake of intruding into their house, she was even going to take her in. "You're done with the recruitment just like that." Meg was also secretly speechless. As the boss, he didn't even have the chance to interrupt. His authority to speak had really dropped drastically. "That's great. Then I have another big sister," Amy said happily. Chapter 13:26. Why? You don't want to? Irina frowned slightly. She felt that the conditions she offered were good enough. No. Jane shook her head quickly. She hesitated and asked in confusion, "I'm just a little confused. Why did you choose me?" "Because I'm too lazy to go out and find others," Irina said frankly. Jane looked at Irina and did not know how to describe her feelings at this time. "Our restaurant is just about to open, but we lack a waiter. If you are willing to stay and be a waiter, we can provide you with accommodation and 3 meals, as well as an appropriate salary." Meg looked at Jane and said. Just as Irina said, he was too lazy to specially recruit people. If this demon girl was suitable, it would naturally be the best. Jane looked at Meg. Although this demon looked a little strange, his eyes were clean and clear, and he was easy to trust. And the little demon with a pair of pincers on her head was even more adorable. Such a family of 3 made her have no doubts. She hesitated and nodded. "If you are willing to let me stay, Jane can't ask for anything more. But if I stay, it may bring you some trouble," Jane added quickly. She did not want to bring disaster to others because of her, just like her mother. If it was not to protect her, trouble? It doesn't exist. Irina waved her hand with a relaxed expression and looked at Jane, who was still standing in the rockery. "You come out first." Jane quickly walked out from behind the rockery. Her blood-stained feet stepped on the shell ground, and there was a trace of pain on her face. However, she did not make a sound, and there was not much pain on her face. Irina glanced at Jane's feet, walked forward, and gently held her wrist. A green light entered Jane's body from her wrist. She only felt a cool feeling brushing across the surface of her body, and the wounds on her body began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Let's go. I'll take you to take a bath and change your clothes." Irina let go of Jane's wrist and walked into the restaurant first. Jane came back to her senses and found that all the injuries on her feet and body had healed, and the pain was completely gone. There was only a faint pink mark left on the wound on her hand, and it was almost impossible to tell that she had been injured. Thank you." Jane was amazed by Irina's powerful healing magic and quickly thanked her. She walked a few steps to catch up with Irina. But when she reached the door of the restaurant, she stopped. Looking at the clean restaurant and then at her feet full of blood and mud, she hesitated and did not dare to step in. "Wear slippers. Your feet will be more comfortable." Meg took a pair of slippers and gently placed them in front of Jane. Mopping the floor was indeed a troublesome thing, and if she stepped in directly, she would feel more pressure. "Thank you." Jane bowed to Meg and carefully put her feet into the beautiful pink slippers. The soft texture was so comfortable that she was pleasantly surprised. She had never worn such comfortable shoes before. She used to wear the straw sandals woven by her mother using seaweed, and it was easy for her feet to be scratched by rocks. With clean shoes, Jane walked into the restaurant carefully. The clean and spacious restaurant with neatly arranged tables and chairs were all new to her. She had never seen such a restaurant on Carapace Island. "The bathroom is upstairs," Irina said at the staircase and went upstairs first. Jane quickly retracted her gaze and caught up with Irina's footsteps. "System, let's choose female clothing," Meg said in his mind as he kept the 2 nets that contained the crayfish. "Host, have you decided to wear female clothing?" The system's voice was tinged with excitement. "I want to choose work clothes for the new employee." Meg rolled his eyes. "I see. Everyone in the circle has been showing off photos of the host in female clothing." The system was a little disappointed. "What the hell?" Meg raised his eyebrows and felt that things weren't that simple. If the host is willing to wear female clothing, the system can provide all the female clothing choices for free and give you a makeup experience bag. The system still didn't give up. "Get lost." Meg rejected coldly. Was he such a gay person? Meg chose a red and white maid's dress with short sleeves for Jane. The boundless sea realm was as warm as summer all year round, and Carapace Island was a typical tropical island. The temperature outside was over 30 degrees Celsius. He chose the maid's dress because it was relatively conservative. Keeping a low profile was the most important thing when doing business on Carapace Island. Being a little conservative could save a lot of trouble. System's preference for female clothing: 1. Maid's dress. 2. Dead swimmers. "Alright, you can shut up now." Meg opened the list listed by the system and went in to take the maid's dress and black leather shoes that were delivered by the system. He went upstairs and handed them to Irina, who had just taught Jane how to use the showerhead and various toiletries. "When did you prepare these clothes? Who did you prepare them for? They don't look like something that I can wear." Irina opened the maid's dress and stared at Meg. Meg felt an unusual murderous aura. He had miscalculated and didn't expect such a problem. A spark flashed through his mind, and he said with a relaxed expression, "This is the work uniform that I prepared for MIA, but it's too small, so I kept it. I don't know if it's suitable for Jane." "I see." Irina nodded and believed Meg's words. "Phew." Meg turned around and sighed softly, praising himself for being quick-witted. About half an hour later, Jane came down from upstairs and walked to Meg and Irina, who were drinking tea. She looked down at her leather shoes and said softly, "Boss, lady boss. It fits quite well." Irina looked at the maid's dress that Jane was wearing. The size was just right, as if it was tailor-made. "Don't be too nervous. You are an employee of the restaurant. We have an employer-employee relationship, not a master-servant relationship," Meg said with a smile. After taking a shower and changing her clothes, Jane looked like a different person. She had a palm-sized face with delicate and 3-dimensional facial features. Although her skin was wheat-colored due to years of exposure to the wind and sun, there were shallow sunburn spots. Her undried grey-white hair was a little wet and scattered, but she still gave off a youthful vibe. "Wow, Sister Jane is so beautiful." Amy circled around Jane and smiled. Jane looked up at Irina and Meg and smiled shyly. "Well, we will officially open for business at noon. Let's talk about your work first." Meg got up and walked to the kitchen. He quickly came out with a stack of paper and 3 lively crayfish. Chapter 13:27. The waiter's job seemed simple, but it was actually quite tedious. Especially when there was only one waiter in the restaurant, the workload was even heavier. Luckily, IE Lobster Restaurant only planned to cook crayfish, and there were only 3 flavors, so the job of ordering was relatively simple. However, Meg's plan was to blow up the entire Demon Islands and create a craze for eating crayfish. Only then could he complete the crayfish capture mission faster. First, the waiter needs to help the customers order, which is to ask them what crayfish flavor they want and how much. Meg began to teach Jane how to quickly become a qualified waiter. Order, serve, pay, clear the table. Jane had to do all this work by herself. Jane, who was originally full of confidence, gradually became nervous and anxious. Let me collect the money. I think this should be quite interesting. Irina interrupted with an expectant smile on her face. If someone doesn't pay up, then we'll beat them all to death. Amy remembered what she said and clenched her little fist beside her face. She said fiercely, "We're super fierce." Yes, we're super fierce. Irina smiled and rubbed Amy's head as she nodded. All right. Meg nodded. Meg was also extremely disgusted by those who tried to dine and dash. This was a serious disrespect for his labor. It was obviously a good choice to let Irina use violence to curb violence. It could also reduce Jane's workload. Otherwise, this little girl would most likely break down. Jane, you need to be responsible for ordering, serving, and clearing the table. There might be more customers, so the workload will be higher. Are you sure you're okay? Meg looked at Jane. This thin and weak body looked like it would collapse with a slight breeze, which made him a little worried. Yes, I can do it. Jane nodded and said confidently, I'm very strong, and the talent of a horned demon is endurance. Although I look very thin, I can carry 100 kilograms of goods and run one round around Carapace Island. However, this restaurant looked like it was newly opened. Even the tables had not been used. Jane was a little puzzled. Why was the boss so confident that business would be good? It wasn't easy to do business on Carapace Island. Those demons thought they were powerful, and would often dine and dash without paying. Even a protective amulet could only guarantee that they wouldn't smash things in the shop. That's good. Meg put away the large plates that were used for training. He couldn't ask for too much from a temporary waiter. A good work attitude was the most important thing. As for the other things, he could slowly practice after he got the hang of it. Gurgle Tilda at this moment, a series of strange noises sounded. Big Sister Jane's stomach is growling. Amy came forward and reached out to gently touch Jane's stomach. You're starving. Jane blushed and was a little embarrassed. Just in time. It's almost noon. Let's have an early lunch, and we can start work after that. Meg glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 10:30 p.m., just the right time to make lunch. Meg made a serving of garlic crayfish for lunch. Each of them had a 1 kilogram serving of garlic crayfish. Below the crayfish were vermicelli soaked in the garlic gravy. This aroma, how can it be so tempting and wonderful? Jane sat at the table and looked at the red crayfish on the large plate in front of her. The shell was cut open from the head to the back, and a spoonful of golden garlic was drizzled in the middle of the open crayfish. The aroma wafted over, and there was nowhere to hide. She had already forgotten how many times she had secretly swallowed her saliva. Her stomach even grumbled uncontrollably, seriously protesting against her actions of not starting to appease her. Eat, don't stand on ceremony, Meg said with a smile. He skillfully twisted off the head of the crayfish and easily removed the shell that had already been split open. The finely chopped garlic turned golden after stir-frying, glowing with golden oil. It covered the crayfish butter, and together with the crayfish, it exuded a tempting aroma. Meg took a bite of the head of the crayfish. The mouthful of crayfish butter and the delicious garlic instantly activated the taste buds. The taste of the garlic was very mild. The stir-frying removed the spicy taste of the garlic, but also completely activated the rich aroma of the garlic. The delicate knife skills and precise heat control made the granules feel just right. The salty and fragrant garlic, together with the delicious crayfish brain, simply made one's soul leave the body and float into heaven. After swallowing a mouthful of crayfish butter, the aroma lingered in the mouth and teeth, and the aftertaste was endless. It's indeed the crayfish that I made. I was right to scold it back then. Meg couldn't help but praise in his heart. Only such garlic crayfish deserved to be called delicious. Host, your thoughts are very dangerous. Please show the repentance and respect that you deserve. Even if it's fake. The system's voice sounded and warned. Isn't this the truth? I feel that the crayfish that I made is more delicious than theirs. Meg said frankly with a smile. After countless days and nights in the kitchen, his thoughts were naturally different from before. After all, he was standing on the shoulders of countless chefs to learn from. Every chef who cooked seriously deserved respect. Slurp. Amy took a bite of the vermicelli and made a soft sound. After chewing and swallowing, she looked at Meg and said happily, "Father, this long and bouncy noodles are so delicious." "This is vermicelli, not noodles," Meg corrected with a smile. "Anyway, it's super delicious." Amy was not in a hurry to eat the crayfish. Instead, she first slurped the vermicelli. The garlic vermicelli was originally a very delicious existence. Chapter 1328. The delicious garlic crayfish paired with the garlic vermicelli was simply too blissful to eat until one was full. Jane's eyes were filled with tears of happiness as she drank the last mouthful of soup in the big bowl and burped contentedly. "Sorry." Jane immediately put down the bowl and covered her mouth with a red face. Irina put down her chopsticks gracefully and asked Jane, "What's wrong with burping? Fairies have to fart and burp too." "Little golden horn, are you full?" After a discussion between Irina and Amy while Meg was cooking, they finally decided on Jane's nickname. "Yes, I'm full." Jane nodded and smiled shyly. She didn't mind the nickname Little Golden Horn at all. Instead, she liked it. Other than her mother, the other demons had never cared about her name, let alone give her an affectionate nickname. Little Golden Horn sounded even cuter than Jane. Moreover, she could feel the kindness and friendliness of Irina and Amy. Ever since her mother passed away, she had been hiding every day. Every demon she met along the way could have killed or violated her. But here, she felt a sense of security. "All right, lunch is over. I'm going to prepare for the lunch service." Meg stood up and prepared to clear the dishes. "This is my job." Jane stood up immediately and took Meg's bowl and chopsticks. Then, she quickly stacked the bowls together and swept all the crayfish shells on the table into the trash can. "All right." Meg looked at the clean and nimble Jane and retracted his hand. It seemed like she was more suited to this job than he had expected. With Jane clearing the table, Meg went into the kitchen and carried a big pot out of the dining room. He set it up in the empty space in the courtyard. As a new restaurant, the easiest and most effective way to attract customers was to grab the attention of the customers first. Although i.e. Crayfish Restaurant wasn't opened in the most prosperous area of Carapace Island, it was close to the main street, so many demons still passed by. Seeing this new house, many demons cast their attention over. However, when they saw the protective amulet hanging on the door, they withdrew their gazes in boredom. With the protective amulet of the 10 Kings Palace, it would not be easy to attack. "Uncle Hades, are you going to start making crayfish?" Justin, who was leaning against the railing next door, was already waiting anxiously. When he saw Meg coming out, his eyes immediately lit up. "Yes, we officially open for business at noon today." Meg nodded with a smile. It seemed like this little rock demon was completely mesmerized by the crayfish's deliciousness. "Father, Mother, come out quickly. Uncle Hades next door is already open for business. Let's have crayfish for lunch today," Justin shouted into the house. Meg turned around with a smile and started to process the crayfish. He was only going to release spicy crayfish for lunch today, as a stable customer base had yet to form. It would be too troublesome to cook too little, and he wouldn't be able to ensure the best time to eat the crayfish if he cooked too much. Therefore, he could only choose a crayfish that was tasty and impactful. When the crayfish was scooped up from the pond, the sand on its surface was removed instantly by the rapid water jet. Unlike the crayfish that were reared in the ditches and paddies, the crayfish that were reared in the system were already considered seafood. Therefore, they didn't need to be washed too much. The crayfish that were baring its fangs and brandishing its claws were also stunned by the water jet. At this moment, the knife flashed, and the perfect back opening was completed. He flicked his finger on the crayfish's tail, and the veins were removed successfully. Then, he threw the crayfish into a big basin at the side. The entire process didn't take more than 3 seconds. "This is an expert." Justin, who was leaning on the railing, was dumbfounded. The kitchen knife was so fast that his eyes couldn't follow it. Before the big crayfish could struggle, its back was cut open, and it was thrown into the basin. Dong, 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 a big basin was filled with the processed crayfish. "Mother, I want to learn this," Justin said as he pointed at Meg when he saw Jemina walk out of the door. "You want to learn everything all day long." Jemina raised her hand and gave him a slap. "It's a good thing that the child wants to learn. We have to give him a chance to choose his future." Ivan followed her out of the door. "You want to challenge me?" Jemina turned to look at him. Ivan swayed left and right, avoiding her gaze, and hummed a few lines. "Chance, chicken, you're too beautiful. Then, I want to eat crayfish," Justin said aggrievedly as he held his head. "Let's go. As neighbors, of course, we should take care of the business. We're the first wave of customers." Jemina took the lead and walked out of the courtyard. "All right." Justin's face lit up, and he quickly caught up with him. "Welcome, neighbors." Meg smiled as he looked at the rock troll family of 3. As expected, the grilled crayfish he made yesterday had the effect of attracting the first batch of customers to the restaurant. "The restaurant looks great. Are the tables and chairs custom-made?" Jemina looked around, and her gaze landed on the black stone table and chairs. Carapace Island didn't seem to produce this kind of stone. It was simple and elegant. "They're just ordinary stones." Meg let the family of 3 sit down with a smile, and then asked, "Do you want to order some crayfish?" "Millimeter." Justin nodded hurriedly. He hadn't eaten in the morning, and purposely saved his stomach for crayfish for lunch. "Do you have a menu?" "We want to look at the menu first," Jemina asked, not in a hurry to nod. "The restaurant can only provide spicy crayfish and beer at the moment." Meg flipped the number plate on the table, and the menu was on the back. Spicy crayfish, 100 copper coins each. Beer, iced, 50 copper coins each. Jemina looked at the menu that only had 2 choices, and was slightly shocked. The crayfish were sold in batches, and the price was 100 copper coins each. That so-called beer was also 50 copper coins each. This price was far higher than that of ordinary restaurants on Carapace Island. If their family of 3 went to a small restaurant outside for a meal, they would only need 100 copper coins to fill their stomachs. Moreover, it was a table full of crabs, fish, and prawns. Ivan was also surprised. Although the 2 of them could earn 10,000 copper coins a month from their work in the fishing ground pulling nets, they had never eaten crayfish that cost 100 copper coins and beer that cost 50 copper coins each. Jemina retracted her gaze from the menu, and said to Meg, "We'll have 3 spicy crayfish." "All right, please wait for a moment. I still need to get some tools," Meg replied with a smile, and turned to walk into the restaurant. Jane, who was standing at the side and didn't get a chance to interrupt, also quickly followed Meg into the restaurant to see if there was anything she needed help with. "Why is it so expensive? Although the crayfish he makes is indeed delicious, if it's 100 copper coins. I'm afraid not many demons would be willing to eat it," Ivan said softly to Jemina, but he had already secretly swallowed his saliva countless times. If Justin's shell change was really caused by this crayfish, then even 10,000 copper coins each would be considered cheap, Jemina said calmly. "Honey, you're really not careless when it comes to important matters." Ivan gave him a thumbs up with a look of reverence, and then moved forward with a bashful smile. I haven't changed my shell in a long time. If I can change my shell again, I'll be a level 4 demon, and our family's status will be able to go up a little. If it's effective, then let Justin eat a few more. He's more talented than you." Jemina glanced at Ivan. "Mother, I love you." Justin hugged Jemina with a blissful expression, and then made a face at Ivan proudly. "How lonely." Ivan sighed desolately. What else could he do? He only ate a pincer yesterday, and he was already captured. Chapter 1329. Boss, is that crayfish really 100 copper coins per crayfish? Jane asked in disbelief as she followed behind Meg with a condiment box in her hands. She had just eaten a crayfish that cost 100 copper coins. "You also think it's too cheap, right?" Meg turned around to look at Jane and pondered seriously. If the regular customers of Mammis knew about this price, they would probably be moved to tears. The cost of a crayfish was 50 copper coins, and the cost of the ingredients was 10 copper coins. This was not including the cooking fee for a chef at the god of cookery level like him. He only earned 40 copper coins per crayfish. Compared to the price he used to charge 4 to 5 times the price of the ingredients, this price couldn't be more reasonable. Could it be that he had found his conscience? No, he just wanted to complete the mission as soon as possible. The crayfish that was priced at 500 copper coins would win based on taste, and Meg wouldn't worry about starving to death. However, this kind of crayfish was destined to be a delicacy for a minority of people, and most of the customers would be rejected. Immerse was positioned as a high-class restaurant, and its high price meant that its customers were destined to be a minority. It wasn't discrimination, but this was the price of food with top-notch ingredients and top-notch culinary skills. Moreover, it was discounted. However, Meg planned to make IE Crayfish Restaurant into a cheap food stall. 100 copper coins wasn't cheap for most of the demons on Carapace Island, but it was 1 kilogram in size. Ordinary demons could also eat one if they clenched their teeth. Therefore, it would have a large base of customers. Meg didn't come to Carapace Island to earn money. The most important thing was to complete the system's mission of capturing 300,000 crayfish. And his plan was to eat them. With Carapace Island as the center, he would radiate to the entire Demon Islands and use the delicious crayfish to cultivate a group of crayfish-loving diners. As long as this hobby was cultivated, these demons would become the #1 natural enemy of the crayfish. Why is it that in my Great China, as long as it's something edible, there's no way to cause a large-scale species invasion? The answer was simple: they didn't have time to develop. Crayfish was an example of an invasive species back then. It was eaten until it became a rare species in Greater China. If it were not for the development of various breeding methods, it would probably have gone extinct. This was a proven example of success. Meg was not too confident about the completion of the mission of catching 100 breeding crayfish in the vast ocean. However, as long as he could solve the problem of species invasion and overflow, and create a batch of irresistible natural enemies for the crayfish, this mission would not be too different from completion. The discount promotion was one of Meg's plans to popularize crayfish on a large scale. Only cheap and good crayfish could quickly become the leader of Carapace Island's supper scene. Is it cheap? Jane was a little speechless. To her, 100 copper coins was a lot of money. She usually picked up shells at the seaside for a whole day, and could only sell them for 10 copper coins. This prawn cost her the money of picking up shells at the seaside for 10 days. It was too expensive. However, this crayfish was really delicious. Now that he thought about it, it still felt like a dream. Perhaps it was because it was delicious that it was so expensive. If it was somewhere else, they would go crazy. Meg nodded emotionally. He pushed open the door and walked out. After putting down the wooden rack, he arranged all the spices and condiments on the wooden rack one by one. He put on an apron and buttoned up his sleeves. Meg's gaze became cold and sharp. Jane stood at the side and looked at Meg, who was standing in front of the pot, in surprise. She felt that he seemed to have changed into a different person at this moment. He lit the fire, held a towel with one hand, and grabbed the 2-meter-wide iron pot to rotate on the stove to heat up the bottom of the pot evenly. He poured the oil into the pot and heated it until it was 70% hot. Then, he poured in the ginger and garlic that he had prepared earlier and stir-fried them. He sprinkled in a bunch of dried chili, pepper, and other spices. The fragrance of the spices wafted out immediately. The family of 3 rock trolls and Jane couldn't help but stretch their heads out to look curiously. Why do you have to be so exaggerated when you're making a dish? Why do you need such a big pot for 3 crayfish? What are those weird things? Although this smell is fragrant, it's also spicy. Jemina frowned. She couldn't recognize any of them anyway. However, the fragrance after stir-frying the spices made her even more curious. After stir-frying the spices, Meg picked up the crayfish that he had prepared earlier, and poured the whole pot into the iron pot. He turned on the fire, held the big spatula in one hand, and grabbed the handle of the pot with the other, stir-frying the crayfish. The blackish-green crayfish gradually turned red, and the fragrance of the crayfish started to ferment together with the fragrance of the spices. Then, it spread in all directions. It smells so good. Justin swallowed his saliva as he looked at the bright red crayfish in the pot. He couldn't wait to have one. This fragrance is completely different from the grilled crayfish yesterday, but why is it still so tempting? It's an irresistible smell. Jemina looked at the crayfish that were being stir-fried in the big pot that Meg was playing with. Although she didn't want to admit it, this spicy fragrance was indeed very tempting. Ah, I'm dead. Ivan rested his head on the table and stared at the crayfish in the pot with his eyes wide open. He only ate one pincer yesterday. No matter what, he had to eat a whole crayfish today. The fragrance of the stir-fried spicy crayfish rose from the courtyard and then gradually drifted out of the courtyard to the road. It smells so good. What's this smell? It seems to be coming from there. In just a short while, there were already over a dozen demons standing outside the courtyard. They all stared curiously at Meg, who was stir-frying the crayfish in the pot. The source of the fragrance was them, and they unknowingly swallowed their saliva. This looks like a restaurant. A Minotaur demon looked up at the signboard. This was the first time he had heard of a crayfish restaurant, but this fragrance was really too tempting. I didn't see it when I passed by last time. Seems like it's newly opened. It's a pity that there's a protective amulet hanging there. A demon with two leopard heads glanced coldly at the large protective amulet hanging at a conspicuous spot on the door. This cooking method is so special. It's the first time I've seen it. It smells good, but I don't know how it tastes. A succubus with an enchanting figure looked at Meg with a smile. Moreover, this chef looks quite delicate. Is that so? But he doesn't live as well as Big Brother. A tall demon stuck close to her from behind, and a pair of big hands already reached out to her waist mischievously. Is that so? That succubus turned around and smiled seductively at him. A glimmer of light flashed in her green and blue eyes. That demon was obviously stunned for a moment, and the movements of his hands also stopped. At this moment, that succubus suddenly lifted her leg and kicked his crotch. Accompanied by the sound of eggs breaking, that tall demon flew backward and crashed onto the street more than 10 meters away. He covered his crotch and cried out in pain. You didn't pay, and you want to touch me? You're courting death. That succubus retracted her leg and glanced at the demons standing beside her. The male demons subconsciously retracted their legs, and the demons who originally wanted to take advantage of her all took a few steps to the side. This was a ruthless character. Chapter 1330. Meg also noticed the commotion outside. He took some time to look up, but his gaze couldn't help but linger on the succubus for a while. That was a beautiful succubus. He couldn't tell her age. She could be said to be in her early 20s, but the charm between her eyebrows was so natural that only a young woman in her 30s could have it. Her figure was enchanting, and she was wearing short black leather pants. She had a head of sexy red curly hair, and her slender phoenix eyes made her seductive face even more charming. All the advantages of a succubus were concentrated on her. This was a woman that men couldn't take their eyes off once they saw her. She also happened to look at Meg. Their gazes met. It was a pair of blue eyes. The mysterious and charming eyes suddenly spun like a whirlpool, trying to drag him into a mysterious place. However, Meg retracted his gaze the moment their gazes met. He secretly sighed in his heart, and lowered his head to continue stir-frying the crayfish. What a joke! It was fine that he fell for the mysterious stone statue, but if even a succubus could charm him so easily, he would be too weak. However, this succubus had at least the strength of a level 8 demon. As a low-level demon race, the strength of this succubus surprised him. Hey! Angela exclaimed in surprise. This guy actually got rid of her eyes of enchantment. Is he an expert? Or is he an unromantic little virgin? Angela looked at Meg with some interest. After the shell of the crayfish turned completely red, Meg sprinkled a handful of sea salt, stir-fried it a few times, and poured in beer to cover the crayfish. He took the pot lid standing at the side, and covered the iron pot with it. The spicy aroma immediately disappeared. Uncle Hades, is the crayfish ready? Justin asked impatiently. No, this is just the beginning. Meg shook his head with a smile. The step of braising the crayfish with beer was very important. It was equivalent to injecting a soul into the crayfish. It couldn't be rushed, and it was unavoidable. Putting down the spatula, Meg looked up at the demons who were watching the commotion outside, and said with a smile, "Everyone, aren't you coming in to try the spicy crayfish that is about to come out of the oven?" The restaurant owner issued an invitation, and all the demons showed some hesitation on their faces. Although the aroma that they had smelled just now was quite tempting, they didn't know how this so-called crayfish tasted. "Sure, I happen to be hungry." Angela walked in through the door and stared at Meg. She activated Eyes of Charm on Meg again. "Please sit." Meg looked at her calmly and smiled. Women were probably the least tempting thing to him. Could there be a woman more beautiful than Irina in this world? Was there a woman who could beat her? No. What else was there to say? He couldn't beat him either. It really didn't work. Angela was stunned for a moment. She was sure that Meg didn't avoid her gaze. He had completely received her eyes of enchantment. Then, there was only one possibility left. What a pity. He can't do it at such a young age. Angela looked at Meg with pity and found a seat to sit down. Meg felt that this succubus's gaze was full of meaning, but he couldn't ask directly, so he could only pretend not to know. Excuse me, what would you like to eat?" Jane went forward and looked at Angela nervously. This was the first time she spoke to a stranger like this. "Crayfish. I'll eat what is making now." Angela pointed at the big pot with a lid in front of Meg. If it wasn't for the tempting aroma, she wouldn't waste time eating here. "This is spicy crayfish. Please take a look at the price." Jane quickly turned the table number on the table and showed her the menu. "Spicy crayfish, 100 copper coins for one." Angela read out loud, thought for a while, and said, "Then give me 2, and a glass of this beer." "Oh, okay." Jane quickly nodded and looked at Meg. "I heard that." Meg nodded with a smile. The little girl still needed to continue training, but it was normal for her to be a little nervous since it was her first time receiving customers. "So expensive. Aren't these crayfish sold by the catty?" "Why are they sold by the catty? Such a big crayfish, 1 catty already. It's not too expensive. It's still acceptable." The demons standing outside were surprised when they heard that. Some demons thought it was expensive and turned to leave. Some demons thought the price was reasonable, but they didn't rush in. They wanted to see how the people who had already ordered tasted. If someone helped them clear the mines, they wouldn't waste 100 copper coins. After the fire boiled, Meg waited for about 3 minutes before opening the lid and collecting the juice. The spicy aroma rose along with the steam and once again wreaked havoc in the air. There was also a faint aroma of wine in the air, which made it even more intoxicating. A few demons left because of the price, but the spicy aroma attracted more demons. They all swallowed their saliva outside the yard. What a shocking aroma. Angela's eyes lit up when she saw the boiling red soup in the big pot. She looked at Meg with a different gaze. Although this man couldn't cook, he was still very good at cooking. She didn't expect there to be such a demon on Carapace Island who could cook. Should she capture him and bring him back? "It smells like spicy grilled fish. It's completely different from the one we had at noon." At this moment, Amy ran out of the restaurant. Her little nose twitched, and she took a deep sniff. She looked at Meg in surprise, and said, "Father, is this a new crayfish flavor? So cute." Angela looked at Amy. The little girl looked like she was carved from jade. Her red clothes made her look like a cooked crayfish shell. She even had a pair of pincers on her head. She looked so cute that she couldn't help but want to touch those pincers. "It's a little spicy." Irina followed them out of the door. She frowned slightly when she smelled the spicy aroma. She still preferred the garlic crayfish. That smell was milder. "Why don't you go inside and rest for a while? There's a lot of smoke and smoke outside," Meg said gently to Irina. After all, they were relying on the aroma to attract customers. So beautiful." Angela looked at Irina, and her eyes lit up instantly. This female demon was wearing a simple black dress. She had an exquisite and beautiful face, long and slender legs, and a distinct collarbone. However, she had breasts that were comparable to her own. More importantly, her aura was like that of a god, noble and elegant. She was completely different from ordinary demons. Oh no, it's the feeling of falling in love. Angela pressed her chest. Then, she suddenly looked at Meg and stared at him. This guy actually married this beauty. And that adorable child is theirs. No, this can't be true. He clearly can't. Chapter 1331. It's all right. I'm here to collect money. Irina shook her head. She glanced at Angela, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes as well. She was actually an 8th-tier succubus. Although she had tried her best to hide her abilities, it was still exposed under the huge difference in their abilities. Angela tried her best to smile innocently when she saw Irina looking at her. To a succubus, especially a rare genius like her, a casual smile could charm those male creatures. However, Irina had already ignored her before her smile fully bloomed. She turned her attention back to Meg, and watched him cook with interest. This is really a lucky toad, to actually be able to eat such a beautiful swan. Angela looked at Meg angrily. She made up her mind that she would definitely save this sister of hers after this mission was completed. The red crayfish surface glowed with red oil, and the large red chili peppers made one's throat heat up. Bring it to the guests, Meg said to Jane as he placed the crayfish one by one on a large plate of paper, and placed it on a tray. Jane picked up the tray carefully, and then placed the 3 plates of crayfish in front of the rock troll family of 3 and Angela. Your spicy crayfish. Please enjoy. Then, she filled a large stone cup with beer, and placed it gently in front of Angela. Your beer. Wow, these crayfish are great. Justin, who had been waiting anxiously for a long time, swallowed his saliva as he looked at the big crayfish in front of him. He couldn't wait to grab a pincer and stuff it into his mouth. The freshly cooked crayfish was still steaming hot, but the rock troll's hard stone shell allowed them to ignore such a temperature. So spicy. Justin put the pincer into his mouth, and his grayish-white face turned green and red immediately. White steam even rose from his head. The spicy soup on the surface of the pincer seemed to have broken through a scoop of hot water on his taste buds. His tongue was instantly numbed, and the spiciness spread through his tongue. His body quickly heated up. What's wrong? Jemina hurriedly asked. Catcher, catcher, catcher. Justin had already chewed open the prawn shell. The plump prawn meat in the pincers, together with the spicy texture, finally blossomed into a wonderful taste in his mouth. The spicy taste was especially refreshing. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it was. He said vaguely, "It's spicy, but it's delicious." Jemina was relieved to see that Justin had finished one pincer, and was starting to break off the prawn's head. She reached out to break off the prawn's head as well. On the other side, Ivan had already pried open the crayfish shell impatiently, and took out the plump crayfish meat from the shell. Looking at the red gravy at the bottom of the plate, he pondered for a while, and dipped the crayfish meat in the gravy before putting it into his mouth to take a bite. Oh my God! The spicy broth and the plump lobster meat combined perfectly. The spicy taste stimulated the taste buds and soared into the sky, almost lifting the top of the head. Then came the tender and delicious lobster meat. The spicy broth had perfectly seeped into the lobster meat, and the various spices gave it a mesmerizing taste. While chewing, one could feel the wonderful chewiness of the teeth colliding with the meat. Spicy and delicious, Ivan didn't know what words he should use to describe this wonderful taste. The feeling of eating the meat alone without the shell was indeed more wonderful than eating them together. He could perfectly experience the wonderful texture of the crayfish meat. The crayfish meat dipped in the gravy made the spicy taste even more intense. Although the tip of his tongue was almost numb, his mouth still couldn't stop. The plump crayfish meat entered his stomach almost in the blink of an eye. After sucking on his gravy-stained fingers, Ivan picked up the remaining crayfish shell and head. He chewed on the crayfish shell. Compared to the crispness of the grilled crayfish last night, the crayfish shell dipped in the spicy broth had a slightly harder texture. However, it still had a different taste. The family of 3 rock trolls ate heartily, and let out a few exclamations and praises from time to time. The customers outside couldn't stand it any longer. 3 or 4 customers had already entered, and found a seat to sit down. They also ordered a crayfish. On the other side, Angela's attention was completely attracted by the crayfish in front of her. This bright red crayfish was even bigger than her face. It was cut open from the head to the tail, revealing the plump meat inside. The spicy fragrance wafted over along with the heat. She heard that humans liked to cook with all kinds of spices, but demons were not as pretentious and particular as humans when it came to eating. They were generally more rough. "It's quite fragrant, but I don't know how it tastes," Angela muttered. Seeing that there were no other tools she could use, she could only use her hands. She first broke off a pincer and unscrewed the shell with her bare hands, revealing the tender meat inside. "It doesn't look any different from ordinary cooking." Angela was a little disappointed. She stirred the crayfish meat in the gravy and put it into her mouth. "Oh!" Angela's expression immediately changed as soon as she put the crayfish meat into her mouth. The unexpected spiciness exploded on the tip of her tongue, as though a firebomb had exploded in her mouth. The burning sensation instantly exploded. Rip! There was a crisp sound. There was already a hole in her black blouse, and it was almost unable to stop the waves. The demons could not help but take a few more glances. Unfortunately, they seemed to be blocked by some kind of holy light, and there was no way to appreciate the beautiful scene of her blouse exploding. Angela had no time to care at this time because after the spiciness, the plump crayfish meat had already appeared on the stage. It was like a spring breeze calming down a huge wave, and then plunged into the deep water. The spicy taste and fresh crayfish meat, under the contrast of all kinds of spices, blossomed with a breathtaking deliciousness. Living on the island all year round, seafood was just the most common food. But this mouthful of crayfish meat overturned all her understanding of seafood in the past 20 years. "This is too delicious." Angela's heart was screaming, and she catered to this suffocating deliciousness without holding back. In this world, there were really people who could make the same food unbelievably delicious. Angela opened her eyes and looked at Meg, who was loading the plate. That man was obviously such an existence. She then looked at Irina, who was standing at the side. She seemed to have some ideas. This toad could eat swan meat. This amazing culinary skill must have played a crucial role. But he really can't. Angela was still a little unwilling. She stared at Meg while eating crayfish in big mouthfuls. After eating a pincer, although it was delicious, the burning sensation in her mouth and throat made her a little uncomfortable. Her gaze fell on the glass of beer on the table. Although it was bubbling strangely, she still reached out to grab the glass and drank a big mouthful. Chapter 1332. Fart. The cool and refreshing beer instantly extinguished the burning spiciness. The soft and delicate taste had a hint of bitterness, which was weak yet slightly pleasant. "This beer is so special, and it's a perfect match with this spicy crayfish." Angela's eyes lit up. The fragrance of the beer was like a flower, elegant but not pungent. The delicate bubbles burst, making a soft sound. Eating a mouthful of spicy crayfish and drinking a big mouthful of cold beer made Angela's expression gradually brighten up. It turned out that delicious food could really make eating a wonderful thing. The rock troll family ate heartily, and Angela ate freely. The demons that gradually gathered could not resist the temptation of the delicacies. More and more demons entered the courtyard, and it was soon full. Jane walked among the customers. Although everyone ordered a crayfish first, she was still afraid that she would remember the order wrongly. Of course, what surprised her the most was that the restaurant had attracted so many customers when it had just opened. This was completely beyond her expectations and imagination. Meg served the crayfish to the customers, and prepared the second pot of spicy crayfish at the same time. The enthusiasm of the customers was indeed beyond his expectations. The opening was smoother than he had expected. The spicy and fresh spicy crayfish brought him the first batch of customers with its aroma. As the courtyard was filled up, more and more passers-by were attracted and became potential customers. The 3 crayfish, meat and shell included, went into the stomachs of Ivan's family of 3. Ivan picked up the crayfish bowl and drank a mouthful of the spicy soup, letting the spicy taste wreak havoc in his mouth. He put down the bowl, wiped his sweat, and looked at Jemina longingly. "Honey, why don't we order another one?" Yes, I'm not full yet," Justin hurriedly agreed. Jemina was a little hesitant. After all, it was a crayfish that cost 100 copper coins each. They obviously could not eat it every day. "Hey, look, isn't my hand starting to molt?" Ivan suddenly raised his hand, and thin white cracks appeared on the grayish-white stone shell as if it was about to shatter. "Is this the 4th time it's going to change its shell?" Jemina grabbed Ivan's hand with a look of surprise on her face. "I didn't have any when I woke up this morning." Ivan couldn't hide his excitement. After thinking for a while, he pointed at the empty bowl in front of him, and said, "It must be because of this crayfish." After eating the crayfish, the cracks appeared. "I think I can change my shell a 2nd time if I eat a few more crayfish," Justin added. Jemina pondered for a while. When she ate the crayfish just now, she also felt hot all over. Her shell felt itchy, as though something was trying to crawl out of her body. Yesterday, Justin had just changed his shell after eating a crayfish. Today, Ivan was about to change his shell after eating a crayfish. It seemed like the crayfish had a very powerful effect on the shell changing of rock trolls. "Let's have 3 more crayfish," Jemina and Jane said. "All right, please wait a moment." Jane nodded. Meg was making the 2nd pot of spicy crayfish. "Give me another crayfish, and then a glass of cold beer." Angela also raised her hand at the side. Only then did she realize that her collar was open. She fastened it unhurriedly, and looked up at Meg with a different gaze. "This fellow's culinary skills are really mesmerizing. If we can catch him and bring him back to the island, then we'll be in for a treat in the future." Angela's lips curled up slightly, and then she looked at Irina and Amy. "It'll be even better if we can bring these sisters along." The spicy crayfish attacked the taste buds of the island's native demons. Coupled with the heat wave of more than 30 degrees Celsius, the demons were tormented back and forth between deliciousness and spiciness. And at this time, a glass of cold beer was the savior of everything. The demons surrounded the square table, peeled the crayfish shells, ate the crayfish meat, and took a big gulp of beer. This combination was better than anything else. "Honey, you settle the bill first. I have to go home and change my shell." Ivan got up and walked out quickly. Mud shells were already falling off his body, and cracks of various sizes were all over his body. It was as though he would shatter at the next moment. Jemina got up and looked at the small cracks that were starting to appear on her body. She took out 6 gold coins and handed them to Irina with a smile, and praised, "Mr. Hade's culinary skills are really amazing and impressive. He'll be proud if you praise him like this," Irina said with a smile as she accepted the gold coins. Jemina dragged Justin, who still wanted another crayfish, away. 100 copper coins for a crayfish and 50 copper coins for a glass of beer were not cheap. However, the demons who had eaten them were all impressed by the wonderful taste, so most of them were quite cooperative when they paid. 5 crayfish and 10 glasses of beer. That's a total of 10 gold coins. Irina reached out her hand to a 2-faced demon who was already a little drunk. 10 gold coins? That 2-faced demon with 2 ugly faces stood up shakily. He looked at Irina with a sinister gaze, and said with a sinister smile, "Chick, did you see what I ate? There's nothing on this table. What right do you have to say that I ate those things? I said I didn't eat anything. What can you do?" The demons who were eating all turned their heads to look. Many of them looked like they were watching a show. If it was possible, they wouldn't mind using the same method to get a free meal. Anyway, that guy with a pair of pincers on his head didn't look like a demon who could fight. However, his wife was really so beautiful that it made people envious. Chapter 1333. Silence ensued in the restaurant. All of the demons looked on at the gradually dissipating smoke, and only after a long while did they slowly close their mouths. Their eyes were filled with horror and incredulity as they looked at Irina and Amy. A fifth-tier two-faced demon. He was actually killed by a stool just like that, and he died so thoroughly that not even a trace of him was left. Who would have thought that such a beautiful female demon and a cute little demon would have such powerful strength and a good mentality to kill demons without batting an eyelid? Gulp. The Minotaur demon sitting at the same table as the two-faced demon swallowed his saliva and slowly lowered his head. He was suddenly glad that he didn't join in the commotion just now. Otherwise, there would be 2 fireworks blooming in the sky right now. The demons who were careless before all looked away and began to calculate whether the money in their pockets was enough to pay for this crayfish meal. So powerful. Jane looked at Irina and Amy in shock and stopped in her tracks. That demon who was incomparably powerful in her eyes was actually slapped into a star by the lady boss and little boss. It was really unbelievable. She suddenly realized that Irina had said in the morning, "Trouble? It doesn't exist." It was just a very ordinary explanation. Angela, who was ready to save the damsel in distress, looked at Irina in a daze as she slowly retracted her folding chair. Her mouth was slightly open, and little stars were already in her eyes. Vulgar but forthright words, unhesitant actions, and flawless coordination. Do you have to be so cool? Angela clenched her fists, and her gaze gradually became firm. I'm going to marry this damn woman sooner or later. Bill. Irina turned around and stared at Angela. Oh, yes. Angela blushed and nodded quickly. She took out 3 gold coins and handed them to Irina. Very good. Irina, who had successfully received the money, finally showed a smile on her face. The crayfish was delicious. I'll come again. Angela reached out to stroke her hair and smiled charmingly at Irina. Missy, your rabbit ran out, Amy reminded her. All the demons looked up. Ah, it's so dazzling. A dazzling light made them close their eyes subconsciously. Ah! Angela looked down and quickly reached out to grab the collar that was not fastened tightly just now. This rabbit is growing quite well, Irina commented seriously. Angela blushed. Shouldn't she be the one to do such things normally? Why was it the other way around? She turned around and ran away. The two-faced demon that exploded into fireworks became the loudest opening salute of the crayfish restaurant. At the same time, it also made the demons who had other thoughts start to focus on the delicious crayfish in front of them, becoming purer. Here's my money. 4 crayfish, 2 cups of beer, 5 gold coins. Here's mine. 2 crayfish, 6 mugs of beer. 5 gold coins. Irina stood at the door. The customers who had finished eating came forward to pay respectfully with their gold coins in their hands. They even reported what they had eaten, and were much more polite to Jane now. Meg looked at this scene, and suddenly felt like he was still in Chaos City. One had to know that this was Carapace Island, the most chaotic island in the Demon Islands. On Carapace Island, peace and order would not be respected, and one would not be able to receive money. Instead, one would easily become the target of bullying. Hence, Meg did not restrict Irina from doing anything. As long as she did not expose her identity, she could do whatever she wanted. Even if she flipped the entire Carapace Island over, he would only help to light the fire. After showing his muscles, he could avoid a lot of trouble. At least, he would not have to deal with those small fries who came looking for trouble every day. Meg ended his business at around 1:30 p.m. The feeling of collecting money is indeed great. Irina shook the little wooden box that she used to store money, and it made a mesmerizing sound. Then, she regretfully said, however, it's not as fast as collecting protection fees back then. Why don't we go back to our old business? Irina looked up at Meg with an eager expression. Don't you know that the limelight has been very tight recently? Getting rid of evil is not a joke. We can't do something like that, Meg said with a serious shake of his head. What does it matter? Let's do evil against evil. Those fellows from 10 King's Palace should have gotten fatter after being fed for a few years. We can cut them off and feed them for a few more years before we continue to cut them off, Irina said with a chuckle. Do you think they are fat sheep? Meg rolled his eyes as he observed a moment of silence for 10 King's Palace in his heart. That's a rather apt description. We should at least wait until we are about to leave. If we do it now, it won't be good for us to continue doing business in their territory. Meg shook his head. It was too cruel to roast mutton on someone else's grass after cutting their wool. All right, let's keep them for a few more days. Irina nodded as she carried the box and turned to walk into the restaurant. Jane was stunned as she listened at the side. Although she didn't quite understand what the boss and lady boss were talking about, her instincts told her that it was definitely something important. After all, she had heard about Ten Kings Palace. Jane, you did very well this afternoon. Meg looked at Jane and smiled. The little girl looked skinny, but just as she said, she was extremely resilient. She didn't look too tired after running back and forth for over 100 times. She could completely keep up with the intensity of her work. Jane blushed. This was the first time she had heard someone other than her mother praise her. Chapter 1334. So fast. Meg was a little surprised. He took off his apron and hung it on a chair at the side. He gently patted Jane's shoulders and comforted her gently. Jane, don't be afraid. They are not here for you. Just stay in the restaurant and don't come out. But Jane looked at Meg. She was worried that the Ten Kings Palace had come because of her. We said we would protect you, Meg said with a smile. He let go of her and walked out of the restaurant. In the courtyard, a fat abyss demon was using a stone chair to wipe the mud off his shoes. Another spatial demon was using a spatula to knock on a metal pot, making clanging sounds. May I know what the two of you are here for? Meg glanced at the spatula in the spatial demon's hand and frowned. However, he was not in a hurry to act. You are the boss here. The spatial demon looked up at Meg and frowned. What race is this demon from? Why haven't I seen him before? Are there demons like the lobster race? Yes. Meg nodded. The fat abyss demon at the side took his feet off the chair and strode forward. He pointed his nose at Meg and said arrogantly, I heard you killed a demon with a protective amulet. Are you not going to obey the rules of the Ten Kings Palace? A two-faced demon who caused trouble. Meg nodded. Then, he pointed at the large protective amulet hanging on the door, and calmly said, if I remember correctly, according to the Ten Kings Palace's rules, the demons who hang the shop's protective amulet have the right to kill any demons who create trouble in the shop, right? You. The abyss demon choked. He had planned to suppress this fellow first before squeezing some benefits out of him. He did not expect this fellow to use the rules of the Ten Kings Palace to suppress him. You said he caused trouble. Do you have any evidence? I heard he did not even leave a single scrap behind. The spatial demon came forward with a spatula and sneered at Meg. If he didn't cause any trouble, why would I, a restaurant owner, make things difficult for a customer? If I wasn't happy, would I kill a customer as a sacrifice to the heavens? Or do you think there are too many customers and you want to scare some away? Meg looked at the spatial demon as if he was looking at an idiot. You. The spatial demon choked. What made him even angrier was that this fellow's eyes were filled with undisguised mockery. Meg sighed and said with a disappointed expression, when I first came to Carapace Island, I heard that the Ten Kings Palace had managed the entire island well. That's why I came here to open a restaurant. If I still can't guarantee that I can open a restaurant on Carapace Island after buying the highest grade protective amulet, then I can only go to the Ten Kings Palace to ask for an explanation. This guy. The spatial demon and the abyssal demon were both enraged. They were merely the lowest members of the Ten Kings Palace. They could do whatever they wanted on Carapace Island just because they were from one of the top 10 tribes and the Ten Kings Palace's name. No one had ever dared to go against them, let alone do something so disrespectful. However, the protective amulets had brought a lot of income to the top 10 tribes over the years. Therefore, the top 10 tribes had also consciously regulated the use of the protective amulets. This way, more demons would take the initiative to buy protective amulets. If this matter reached the headquarters, they wouldn't be able to do anything to Meg. Instead, it would be troublesome. I'm warning you. You better behave yourself on Carapace Island. Otherwise, I won't let you have an easy time, the spatial demon warned as he pointed his spatula at Meg. I've always been a stickler for rules. Meg smiled as he grabbed the spatula's handle and pulled it back from the spatial demon's hand. Looking at this spatial demon, he really couldn't get angry at all. After all, he had killed his ancestor in his first battle. The spatial demon tribe's current unstable status was all thanks to him. Looking at this little fellow, he actually felt a little pitiful. As for that abyssal demon, he would probably be rushing back to attend his chief's funeral in another 2 days. He wondered if he would still be able to look down on others like he was doing now. The spatial demon and the abyssal demon were rebuffed. They couldn't find any fault with him, so they could only leave angrily. Meg looked at the backs of the 2 demons as they left, and murmured to himself thoughtfully, "Seems like I really have to take advantage of them. Boss is so impressive." Jane, who was hiding in the restaurant and secretly watching this scene, looked at Meg with admiration. His neither servile nor overbearing attitude and unyielding confidence made her feel something completely different. On Carapace Island, all the demons were used to being oppressed by the Ten Kings Palace. She never thought that anyone would dare to resist. Meg closed the courtyard door and turned to enter the restaurant. He looked at Jane, who was standing at the door, and said with a smile, "Jane, you should take a nap too. Your room is upstairs. I'll bring you up." "Millimeter HM," Jane responded softly. She followed Meg's arrangement and followed him upstairs. Irina was playing with Amy and Ugly Duckling in the room. Amy's bell-like laughter came from the gap of the door that wasn't closed. "You'll stay in this room." Meg pushed open a door at the other end of the corridor. It was a simple room with a single bed, a dressing table, and a window that could see the garden at the back. There was a blooming orchid on the windowsill, and there was a faint floral fragrance in the room. Jane opened her mouth, and only asked Meg after a while, I'm staying here. It's a little small, isn't it?" Meg looked at the small room that could barely fit one more person. He had no choice. This was added by the system at the last minute, and it had already shrunk the space of his study a little. If he continued to expand it, it would be against the system's rules. "No, it's not." Jane hurriedly shook her head. "You're mistaken. I don't think it's small. I just think this room is too good. I've never stayed in such a good room before. If it's not suitable for me to stay upstairs, I can also sleep on the floor downstairs." Even the floor downstairs was cleaner than where she used to stay. The most important thing was that it was safe. She felt a sense of security that she had never felt before here. Meg looked at Jane, who was a little frightened, and suddenly felt a little sorry for her. It was hard to imagine what kind of life this little girl had been living before this. "This is your room. Rest for a while. You've worked hard at noon, and you may be even busier at night," Meg said gently, and closed the door gently. "My room," Jane murmured softly. Her eyes scanned every corner of the room carefully. She reached out and pressed the edge of the bed gently. It was a soft and warm feeling. After hesitating for a while, she sat down gently on the edge of the bed. After a while, she slowly lay back on the bed. "It's so comfortable." A smile appeared on Jane's face. It was as warm and soft as if she had fallen into her mother's embrace. A drop of tear fell from the corner of her eye. If she had met Boss earlier, her mother might not have died. "This fellow. I really want to pull out his pincers and stuff them into his nagging mouth," the abyss demon said unhappily as he twisted his neck. "It's all right. Since that fellow wants to do business on Carapace Island, he will fall into our hands sooner or later." The spatial demon revealed a sinister smile. However, looking at those fishermen who were covered in mud and those pairs of eyes that were glowing with hope, Mag walked straight up, opened the yard's door, and said to the demons, "Please send your crayfish to me. I will buy the crayfish at the price of 50 copper coins per crayfish. I will buy as many as you have." All the demons revealed surprised smiles on their faces. They were originally worried that this was a lie, but they didn't expect it to be true. This boss would really buy crayfish at the price of 50 copper coins each. Moreover, there was no limit. Those who came here all caught crayfish. Some caught dozens of crayfish, while others caught 3 to 5 crayfish. All of them could be exchanged for quite a bit of money. Under Meg's request, the demon fisherman counted the crayfish and put them into the pond one by one. Those that weren't crayfish and those that were dead were all removed by Meg. Then, he distributed the money to the fishermen according to the number of crayfish they caught. Some of the fishermen jumped up and down in excitement after receiving the money. Most of them had happy smiles on their faces. Tucker caught more than 20 crayfish during the day and received more than 100 copper coins. He couldn't help but wipe his tears as he carried the heavy money pouch. He was getting closer and closer to the hope of leaving Carapace Island with his wife. He also planned to catch crayfish during the night to gather 10,000 copper coins as soon as possible. The young fisherman, Kitar, counted the money and stuffed it into his pocket. He caught another 40 crayfish today and received 2,200 copper coins from Meg. In addition to the 2,500 copper coins in the morning, he almost received 5,000 copper coins today. He looked at Meg curiously and said, "Sir, these crayfish are prickly. How did you cook them? Are they really tasty?" The other fisherman also looked at Meg curiously. Many demons had been tricked by these crayfish today, and their hands were still numb. They really couldn't understand why this boss would spend 50 copper coins to buy these things. The restaurant is about to open for business. If you want to know, you can cook them and try them, Meg said with a smile as he turned on the tap and poured water into the pond. Because of the mud, this batch of crayfish had to be cleaned in an extra step. "All right, then I will give it a try. I have been prickled by them dozens of times today, so I will eat them to vent my anger." Kitar nodded. He was much more confident now that he had a few thousand more copper coins in his pocket. "Sit anywhere. We will open for business at 5, Meg said with a smile. He had successfully converted another customer. Kitar sat down at the corner of the door and looked around. His gaze landed on the number plate on the table. Chapter 1336. "Honey, don't you think my new shell is pretty?" Ivan asked Jemina excitedly as he raised both his hands, revealing his blackish-grey stone shell with a tinge of red. After eating 2 crayfish this afternoon, his shell that hadn't been changed for 5 to 6 years finally cracked and faded, replaced with this new shell. This also meant that he had successfully broken through and become a 4th-tier rock troll. The difference between 3rd tier and 4th tier seemed to be only a thin line, but it was the natural chasm between low-level demons and mid-level demons. Low-level demons would be looked down upon no matter where they were, while mid-level demons could be recruited by some demon islands and gain a recognized identity. It looks a little different from other people's 4th-tier stone shells. Could this red be because of the crayfish? Justin's new shell has this color too. Jemina had a smile in her eyes, but she didn't show it too obviously. She reached out to touch Ivan's stone shell gently, and asked in confusion. "This is a high-grade red. It looks much better than theirs," Ivan said with a smile. He was very satisfied with his stone shell. Mother's shell is also starting to crack. It must be because of the crayfish that Uncle Hades made. "Let's go eat crayfish tonight," Justin said expectantly. "Sure." Jemina nodded. "Honey, you're such a cute little skr." Ivan looked at Jemina in shock. He thought he would have to spend some time persuading her, but he didn't expect Jemina to agree so readily. Jemina slapped Ivan's pouting face away, and calmly said, "Since eating crayfish can increase our strength, why should we reject it? As long as our strength increases, earning money will only get easier." "Honey is wise." Ivan gave her a thumbs up in admiration, and then got up to leave. The booming business in the afternoon brought a stable source of customers to the crayfish restaurant. At the same time, the reputation that spread out also attracted some demons. The dozen or so tables in the courtyard and restaurant were filled up very quickly. Meg set up another dozen or so tables on the road at the request of the customers, and all of them were filled up. Mag walked between the 3 big frying pans with a big spatula in his hand. He was as calm as a martial arts expert, and his movements were smooth as flowing water as he served the spicy crayfish to the customers one by one. The spicy and refreshing crayfish, together with the frosty and delicious beer, completely ignited the atmosphere of the crayfish restaurant. This crayfish is really delicious. It's spicy and refreshing. Hiss-ha. Give me 2 more. A demon took deep breaths. His lips were completely red and swollen. Although Carapace Island had a bad reputation, these demons with bad reputations seemed to have put away their evil faces in front of the delicacies. They became pure and enjoyed the delicacies at this moment. At 9 o'clock, all the crayfish were eaten, and the feast ended. Meg had collected a total of 1050 crayfish today, with an average weight of 2 catties. This meant that he had sold 2,000 catties of crayfish on the first day of business. I also want to keep a low profile, but my ability doesn't allow me to. Meg sighed. There was probably no other person who opened a crayfish restaurant like him. It's full. Irina placed the wooden crate that was already full on the table and revealed a satisfied smile. There was also a troublemaker tonight. She smacked it into the street with a chair, and after confiscating all its assets, the other magical beasts became very well behaved. So much money. Jane looked at the crate full of gold, silver, and copper coins. She had never seen so much money in her life, and the boss had earned it all in a day. This is only the beginning. Meg said calmly. It was only 100,000 copper coins. After deducting the cost, it was only 40,000 copper coins. With the same amount of labor, he could easily earn 300,000 to 400,000 copper coins in a day at Mammoth. Although he had earned money, he felt like he had made a loss. Jane, you have worked hard today. Clean up the table and go wash up and rest. Meg looked at the tired Jane and said. Today, she had taken on the role of the rotating axis of the entire restaurant and completed the work very well. However, this kind of labor intensity was still a bit too much for a 13-year-old girl. It's okay, I'm not tired at all. Jane shook her head, her eyes were still very bright. Compared with the fear of being in a precarious situation outside, she could not only eat delicious food in the restaurant, but also get the care of the boss and lady boss. There was also a warm and comfortable bed to rest in. This kind of hard work was nothing at all. No, it's too hard for little Goldhorn to look after. Let's recruit another employee. Irina looked at Meg and said. I'm afraid it's not easy to recruit new employees. Meg also knew that Jane was the only one supporting the restaurant, but the time they would stay here was not fixed, and they would not be stationed here for a long time. Irina thought for a moment and said, why don't I just go and grab one? Let's think about this at length. Meg smiled and said. This method was too simple and crude. After all, they were not here to colonize. It was not good to just grab an employee. After cleaning up the table, Meg let Jane rest first, and the family of 3 changed into black night clothes. Father, where are we going? Amy touched her black mask and asked curiously. To catch a demon. Meg said with a smile and waved his hand. RZ swooped down from the sky and landed lightly on the balcony. Are we going to kill the pig tonight? Irina said eagerly. Let's raise the pig for 2 more days. Our target today is not him. Meg jumped onto the back of the griffin with Amy in his arms. Irina also flew up lightly and sat behind Meg. Then who are we going to catch today? Irina was a little puzzled. Simmons' lover. Meg patted RZ's back gently and ordered, RZ, go to Flame Island. RZ flapped its wings and immediately rose into the sky, flying northwest. Not long after, a volcanic island appeared in Meg's sight. In the center of the island, there was an active volcano that was erupting. Red magma spewed out from the crater and flowed towards the sea from the southwest. The magma rivers were like the veins of the earth. Mist and volcanic ash shrouded the sky above the island. Before they even got close, they could already feel the unusual heat. Flame Island was originally called Lava Island. When the lava demons were at their peak, this island was one of the territories of the lava trolls. However, as the lava demons declined, the flaming demons became stronger day by day. Lava Island fell into the hands of the flaming demons and was renamed Flame Island. It should be that island. RZ, descend. Meg pointed at a small island on the sea northwest of Flame Island. Chapter 1337. Chimph, that bastard. I don't know which vixen he went to find today. He hasn't come to my place for 3 days. On the second floor of a castle built with crystal stones, Charlene, who was wearing a tulle dress, leaned against the window and looked at the burning Flame Island. She muttered with some hidden bitterness. Her enchanting figure was faintly discernible under the tulle dress. Madam, my lord dotes on you the most. He must be too busy with something in the clan and can't take time out. A young female demon said softly. Is that so? Charlene smiled. Her smile was seductive and confident. Simmons was indeed unable to escape from her grasp. Although he was the chief of the flaming demon tribe, under her skirt, he was still a little brother. Looks like this night can only belong to the two of us again. Charlene retracted her gaze and turned to look at the young female demon. She raised her chin slightly and coldly said, Kneel. The purple-striped griffin circled above the island before flying sideways and landing lightly in the forest beside the crystal castle by the sea. RZ, you stay here. Meg patted RZ's head before jumping down from the bird's back with Amy in his arms. Irina also landed lightly on the ground. She looked at Meg and asked, Is it a bloodbath? Tactical bloodbath. Meg nodded. This island was used by the chief of the flaming demons, Simmons, to hide his mistress. Meg had related records in the information he obtained from the Grey Temple. The mistress of this island was a demon mother, and she was also the demon that Simmons doted on the most. Simmons' wife was also a powerful 10th-tier flaming demon, and she had a family background that was not inferior to Simmons. Therefore, he could only find another place to hide his mistress outside of Flame Island. Meg and the rest's purpose of this trip was to capture that demon mother. As for the other demons, killing them was the easiest way to deal with them. The flaming demons were ranked 5th among the top 10 demon tribes. According to the information, they were very passionate about expanding their territory. They were one of the main warring factions among the demons, and were also warring factions like the abyssal demons. Meg had recently learned how to stop a war with a war by making the war happen among the warmongers. Assassin Xiao Ari, ready. Amy blinked her large eyes, which were the only part of her face exposed, and raised the magic staff in her hand. Meg looked at Amy, who was dressed in black. Even though she was playing the role of an assassin, she still looked very cute. He smiled and said, Then let's make a move. It's best if we can make Simmons think that Alfred did it. Shift the blame? I'm the best at this. Irina pulled out an enormous clear sky hammer out of nowhere. She carried it with one hand and put it on her shoulder. Then, she excitedly walked towards the crystal castle. Meg looked at Irina's domineering footsteps, and Amy, who was imitating her and carrying her magic caster's staff on her shoulder, walking in the same footsteps, and could only helplessly follow. What demon? A vigilant voice sounded. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, and the entire island seemed to shake. Irina dragged her hammer as she passed by. A demon had been smashed into a meat patty and was deeply embedded in a stone pit. His original appearance could no longer be seen. Who? Bang! You, bang! Hurry, bang! Save, bang! Apart from the first demon, none of the remaining demons had the time to speak a complete sentence. The military layout on this island could not be said to be weak. There were 2 9th-tier demons and a team of 10 7th-tier demons. It was clear how much Simmons doted on this lover of his. However, such a force did not stand a chance against Irina's Mjolnir at all. In a short 3 minutes, the surroundings of the crystal castle had been bathed in blood. The air was filled with the smell of blood. Meg was secretly speechless as he looked at Irina. Her clean and neat methods, the profound order in which she killed the demons, and the random large pits on the ground made these demons look like they had died in a tragic stampede. And only the porcupine battle boars of the Abyss demon tribe could cause such a large-scale stampede. She was indeed very professional at passing the buck. She should be hiding in this crystal castle. Meg looked up at the castle made of various colored crystals. Under the moonlight, it was dazzling and dreamy, just like the scenery in a dream. It should be a woman's favorite. In order to please this person, Simmons had really put in a lot of effort. What a beautiful castle. Amy's eyes lit up. Irina lowered her head and said to Amy, "Student Amy, as an emotionless killer, you must not be affected by external objects when carrying out your mission. In our eyes, this should be no different from ordinary stones." Then, she swung her hammer and smashed it on the crystal castle. Along with the sound of crystal shattering, the dreamy crystal castle suddenly collapsed. Pieces of beautiful, pure natural crystal fell to the ground and shattered into crystal fragments. Two figures, who were only wrapped in bedsheets, fell out of the castle, and looked at Mag and Irina with a panicked expression. They were dressed in black, and there was a black mask on their faces, so it was impossible to identify who they were in this dark night. Their guards, on the other hand, had clearly been killed in the previous muffled sounds and screams. "You! Who are you? What do you want?" Charlene said nervously. Her bare feet were already bleeding from stepping on the crystal shards. Although she had extraordinary skills in seducing men, when it came to fighting, she was just a level 3 demon who didn't know magic and didn't have any fighting talent. Meg looked at Charlene. Although she was only wrapped in a bedsheet, from the snow-white long legs and sexy collarbones under the bedsheet, as well as her soft and charming face, he could see that she was a woman who could make men fall in love with her. What was even more strange was that her face seemed to be changing at any time. It was very subtle and natural. It made you feel like you could see a new face at any time, but it didn't seem abrupt. Her frowning and painful expression made people feel pity for her. They wanted to quickly take her out of the crystal fragments and love her. Is this the talent of the ghost mother demon? Sure enough, it's a race that is as famous as the succubus, but rarer than the succubus. Meg thought. Other than being surprised, it didn't have much of an effect on him. The young female demon standing behind Charlene quietly held a blue leaf in her hand. A cold light flashed in her eyes, and she raised her hand to fly out. "I'll hit you." At this moment, a crisp voice sounded behind the two female fiends. A large magic caster's staff heavily knocked on the heads of the two demons. The two demons didn't even have time to make a sound before they were knocked unconscious on the ground. Killer Xiao Ari, super fierce. Amy looked down at the two fallen female demons and said with a serious face. Chapter 1338. Meg, who originally wanted to say something, looked at Amy, who was blinking her eyes and looking at him expectantly as if she was saying, "Praise me, praise me." This style of sneak attack was really, perfectly inherited. He could only helplessly praise her. "Well done, little Amy. You have some of my style now." Irina nodded in satisfaction. She used the holy light to block the beautiful scene of the bedsheet falling off. Then, she walked forward and picked up the two female demons from the pile of crystal shards as if they were dead chickens. She threw them onto the beach at the side, and a layer of sand formed on them. Then, she looked at Meg and said, "What about now? Are we going to bring them away or bury them on the spot? They have no value if they're dead. Let's bring them back and lock them up first," Meg said with a smile. He broke off a big branch and wrote a line of words on the beach with messy notes. Then, he threw the branch into the sea, and it completely disappeared after the waves swept it away. "Let's go. I've already arranged a time and place with him. It's on the stone statue island that day." Meg erased their footprints and all the suspicious traces they left behind. At the same time, he added some traces and details of the abyssal demons that had been here. The three of them carried the two female demons who were wrapped up into sandballs back to Arzee's position and quickly left this small island. After returning to Carapace Island, Meg locked the two female demons in a small dark room on the balcony. Amy's attack was not light, and she had yet to wake up. However, her life was not in danger. After being wrapped up in sand by Irina, the two of them had already turned into roly-poly toys. There was no need to worry about them running away even if they were thrown into the small dark room. Are you sure Simmons will go? How do we inform Alfred? If the two of them join forces, I don't have full confidence that I can kill them both, Irina asked doubtfully as she looked at Meg, who had closed the door. Simmons has a fiery temper, and he dotes on this female demon a lot. The place where he hid his mistress was suddenly destroyed, his most trusted subordinates were all killed, and his beautiful concubine was also kidnapped. He is definitely not someone who will let things go easily. I've also made preparations for Alfred. Come with me. Meg led Irina downstairs and into the study. Soon, he came out with a black wooden carving and handed it to Irina. This is the stone statue. Irina looked at the rough wooden carving in her hand with some surprise. She could roughly make out the appearance of a stone statue. It's my first time doing wood carving, so I'm not very familiar with it. Meg explained awkwardly. If it was a radish, he would have carved it better. I plan to use this to send Alfred to Stone Statue Island. It's relatively remote and is about the same distance from Flaming Island and Abyss Island. It's a good ambush point. But if they talk to each other after meeting, this plan will seem a little lame, Irina said. I don't think they will talk to each other. Meg shook his head with a smile and handed a piece of paper to Irina. Irina looked at it seriously for a while, and her eyes lit up. She looked up at Meg with some surprise and said, "Not bad. I didn't expect you to know how to use schemes now. Bold but not astute. That's not a good word." Meg spread his hands. This was a very simple way to sow discord. However, without the support of a powerful force like Irina, it would not be so simple. He asked Amy to burn half of the wooden carving with fire. Then, he used the burnt wood to write a line of words on a stone and tied the two together. Meg went out alone and rode on a Z to Abyss Island. From above the abyss, he accurately dropped the wooden carving into the hall in the middle of the abyss. If the information was correct, that hall belonged to Alfred. The griffin disappeared from the sky above Abyss Island in the blink of an eye. The stone statue that was tied to a burning red meteorite smashed through the roof of the hall, breaking the silence of the abyss. Simmons, you've gone too far. Alfred stood in the middle of the hall and crushed the stone and wooden carving. He looked up at the roof that was smashed through and gritted his teeth. His red eyes flashed with a crazy murderous intent. Anyone who tried to touch the power of the stone statue would have to die. Alfred, fuck you. On the small island, Simmons, whose body was burning with raging flames, roared into the sky. The flames that swept out melted the crystals. He had only come half an hour later than usual to satisfy the yellow-faced woman at home. He did not expect the entire island to be bathed in blood, and Charlene was nowhere to be found. On the Demon Islands, only the porcupine battle boar could leave such footprints. Moreover, it had to be Alfred's porcupine battle boar that could make the level 9 flaming demon powerless. Simmons, lend this woman to me for 2 days. Come to West Point Island the day after tomorrow to collect her. I'll wait for you. Looking at the messy handwriting on the beach, Simmons could almost imagine Alfred's ugly face. This damn bastard actually dared to kill his subordinates so arrogantly and snatch his woman. Damn bastard. Aren't you just worried that I'll steal your position as the marshal of the Allied forces? Let me see who will die in whose hands. Simmons gritted his teeth and jumped onto a giant black beast. The remaining small island was engulfed in a sea of fire. Together with the crystal castle, it turned into ashes. The morning sun shone in through the gap in the curtains and landed on Jane's face. Jane frowned slightly and then suddenly opened her eyes. At the same time, she sat up on the bed and reached out to grab the stone at the head of the bed. However, this time, she touched nothing. There was only a small moving alarm clock at the head of the bed. Jane was stunned for a moment. She looked at the furnishings in the room and then came back to her senses. She was no longer living in the cave at the edge of the cliff. Instead, she was living in a safe and comfortable room and sleeping on a big soft bed. However, what happened yesterday was too surreal. It was like an unreal dream. She reached out and pinched her thigh. She grimaced in pain and immediately woke up. So it wasn't a dream. It was so comfortable to sleep. Jane raised her hands and stretched. After waking up, all the fatigue in her body disappeared. It wasn't like sleeping on the stone where her whole body would hurt the next day. Oh yes, I should get up and work. Jane hurriedly got off the bed and folded the thin blanket carefully before opening the door and going out. Jane, why are you up so early? There's no need to operate in the morning. You can sleep in. Meg had just finished washing up and said to Jane with a smile. It was only 6 o'clock in the morning. He was used to waking up early, and his biological clock woke him up automatically. However, Jane had nothing to do since she woke up so early. I've already slept enough. I've never slept so well. Jane shook her head and looked at Meg. Boss, is there anything I can do? For example, washing clothes or something. I can do anything. Chapter 1339. I don't have anything for you to do in the morning. Meg shook his head with a smile before looking at Jane. Oh, right. What race are you from? Don't you have your own island on the Demon Islands? I'm from the Unicorn Demon tribe. I heard from my mother that the Unicorn Demon tribe was almost wiped out in the racial war. After the war ended, only a few dozen of us survived, so we didn't get our own Demon Island. Jane shook her head with a tinge of sadness in her eyes. She had only seen her mother in all these years. Her father had died before she was born. Meg was deep in thought. A racial war was a disaster for any race. Once it started, no race would be the winner. Then, do you have any racial talents? Like magic, or some kind of mutation? Meg continued to ask. Jane was too weak and didn't have any skills. It wouldn't be easy for her to survive on this chaotic carapace island. My mother didn't teach me. I don't know magic, and I don't know how to mutate. Jane shook her head. The unicorn demon is a very rare light element demon. They were wiped out back then because they used too much healing holy light on the battlefield. Everyone hated them, so there was a saying on the battlefield, we can lose the group battle, but the unicorn demon must die. Then, before the war ended, the Unicorn Demon tribe was almost wiped out. Irina had woken up at some point, and was leaning against the door frame with a smile. Healing holy light. Jane's eyes lit up. Although she didn't know what Irina meant by group battle, she was sure that the Unicorn Demon tribe had its uses. Light element demon? Meg's eyes also lit up. Ever since Irina used the holy light to clear the black fog easily, he had been thinking about replicability. However, light element magic casters were extremely rare. Until now, he had only seen Irina. He didn't expect Jane to be a natural light element demon. Little Gold Horn, it's not that you don't have talent. It's just that your golden horn hasn't been consecrated yet. Irina walked forward and touched Jane's faint golden horn lightly. A beam of holy light lit up from her fingertip and pierced into the golden horn like a needle. Crack. With the sound of a mud shell cracking, the golden horn shed a thin layer of shell. The golden horn had a hint of translucency, as if it had been lit up, emitting a bright golden light. Meg was amazed by Erin's consecration technique. This is what true consecration looks like. Jane froze on the spot. She looked up at her golden horn in disbelief. A slight burning sensation came from her forehead. A strange power spread from the horn to her body. It seemed to be changing her body. Why was his horn suddenly glowing? What was that mysterious power? After about 3 minutes, the golden light completely faded. Jane's horn had become a translucent golden horn, like an exquisite crystal art piece, much more advanced than before. Little Golden Horn, it seems that your bloodline is quite pure. Your talent should be quite good too. Irina stepped forward and carefully observed Jane's golden horn. She nodded with satisfaction and said, in that case, you can learn the holy light technique from me. Jane was overjoyed, but hesitated. Can I really? Ever since she was young, she had been the target of bullying and ridicule. She didn't have the ability to protect herself or her mother. She could only hide in the most dangerous cliffs and caves like a stray dog. And now, The lady boss actually wanted to teach her the holy light technique. Even though she didn't know what it was extremely precious to her. Since there's nothing to do in the morning, I'll teach you after breakfast, Irina said with a relaxed expression. Then, she turned around and entered the washroom to brush her teeth and wash her face. I'll go make breakfast. Meg smiled and went downstairs. Since Irina wanted to teach Jane the holy light technique, there was nothing for him to do. Anyway, Jane didn't look like she was cut out for swordsmanship. After learning the holy light technique, she could go to the animation company to have her face censored. After breakfast, Irina took Jane to the balcony to learn the holy light technique. Amy said that she wanted to learn it too and went upstairs with them. Meg went out and happened to meet the family of rock trolls next door who were carrying wooden buckets. He greeted them with a smile. Good morning, are you going to the beach? Yes, Boss Hades. Don't you collect crayfish? We were thinking of catching some crayfish too. 2 live crayfish for 1 cooked crayfish. It's more worth it than working at the quarry, Ivan said with a smile. This was the decision that the family of 3 came up with after a meeting last night. Then I wish you all the best, Meg said with a smile. He didn't expect that even Ivan's family would join the ranks of gathering seafood. It seemed that the prelude to the era of gathering seafood had begun. At 8 o'clock, a long line formed outside the restaurant on time. The number of fishermen had doubled compared to yesterday evening. Many of them were amateur fishermen with mud all over their faces. They were obviously nobodies who had just joined the gathering seafood army. As for the experienced fishermen, their nets and buckets were almost filled with crayfish. They had smug smiles on their faces and mocked the newbies who had only caught 1 or 2 crayfish. The long queue attracted the curiosity of many demons that were passing by. When they heard that a crayfish of the same style could be sold for 50 copper coins in this crayfish restaurant, many demons excitedly rushed to the seaside. They were afraid that the crayfish would be taken away by others if they were a step late. Meg bought all the crayfish from the fishermen at 50 copper coins each. He didn't cheat anyone. The fishermen happily counted the money in their hands with satisfied smiles on their faces. Kitar pocketed the money bag and looked at Meg expectantly. Boss, do you sell crayfish in the morning? Only at noon and at night. It's too heavy to eat crayfish in the morning. Meg shook his head with a smile. Is that so? Then it seems that I can only eat at night, Kitar said with some regret. He had caught more than 40 crayfish last night and earned more than 2,000 copper coins. Both his wallet and his were a little bloated. Moreover, the crayfish made by this boss was really delicious. He had never eaten such delicious food in his life. It had completely subverted his imagination of food. It was obviously just something to fill the stomach, but after it was made by him, it became so delicious. Meg put all the crayfish he had collected into the pool. He first washed them a few times with rapid running water. Then, he filled them with clean water and threw 2 broken swords in to let them spit out the dirt. This morning, he had received 1523 crayfish, and the mission progress had become 8100. System, after I make the demons on the demon islands fall in love with eating crayfish, the mission should be considered a success, right? Even if the natural enemies that I have cultivated for them really reproduce, they won't be able to cause any big waves. I reckon there won't be enough to eat, Meg said in his heart. Chapter 1340. If the host's foodie guidance only covers the waters of Carapace Island, it will not achieve the effect of exterminating the crayfish. The system will judge the mission as a failure. The system remained silent for a while before answering. Of course it's impossible if it's only Carapace Island. I believe the demons on the other islands will take action soon, Meg said with a smile. He wasn't worried at all. However, you have to at least give me a standard for judging, right? Mammoth is half closed now. If I sell these cheap crayfish outside every day, not only will I not earn any money, you won't earn a single cent either. Let's go back to Chaos City and sell each crayfish for 500 copper coins. You can earn money, I can earn money too. Let's get rich together. This seems to make some sense. Look, the crayfish in the farm are growing bigger by the day, and it's time for them to be released. However, we can't harvest them because of those crayfish that escaped from the cages. Don't you think it's very unfair? Meg continued. Blue Skinny, Mushroom, it's right that you want to cry. All right, let's use the crayfish rearing base as the center. The nearby 300 nautical miles will be the area. The crayfish aren't very diligent, so they won't be able to run far. According to the crayfish's habits and the waves of the ocean currents, they should still be active within a range of 50 kilometers in 4 days. If the host can make all the islanders within a radius of 150 kilometers fall in love with eating crayfish and complete half of the mission of capturing the breeding crayfish within 7 days, the mission will be considered completed. The mission was halved. This result made Meg heave a sigh of relief. Even if all the islanders on Carapace Island joined in the gathering, Meg didn't think they would be able to catch all 100 breeding crayfish. The crayfish that escaped from the crayfish rearing base could very well disembark on the nearby islands or live at the bottom of the sea. Carapace Island intercepted a portion of them, but that was only a portion of the 300,000 crayfish. It was still unknown if they could even gather 50 crayfish. Breeding crayfish. Meg took out a crayfish with a red belly from the pool. This was the system's uncastrated crayfish. Compared to the other black-green crayfish, its characteristics were quite obvious. It was also bigger than the normal crayfish, weighing about 1.5 kilograms. By the way, apart from the crayfish on the island, perhaps I can also recruit some undersea crayfish fishermen to catch all the crayfish that don't want to show up at the bottom of the sea. Meg's eyes lit up as he had an idea. Miss, when is Mr. Mac coming back? Look, when I woke up today, there were a few dots on my nose. I can't get rid of them until I eat Mr. Mac's tofu pudding. Yes. Look at my skin. It's so dry. It's not tender at all. I really need Mr. Mac's nourishment. If Mr. Mac doesn't come back soon, I'm going to hang myself in front of the restaurant with my eyes wide open. I won't close them even if I die. The entrance of Amy's was blocked by a group of crazy women. They were complaining to Yarbemia about the terrible consequences of not having tofu pudding. They were crying as if they had just been robbed of $1 million. I want to eat grilled fish. A different voice came from outside the crowd. All the women fell silent. They turned to look at Harrison, who was standing outside, and said in unison, "Scram. Scary women." Harrison was shocked. He slowly stepped back, then turned around and ran away. Sorry, we don't know when the boss will come back. If he comes back, he will definitely make tofu pudding for everyone. Please wait patiently, Yarbemia said apologetically. Looking at this group of crazy women, she was a little afraid that they would really hang themselves in front of the restaurant or tear it down. Hearing that, all the women were disappointed. However, seeing that Meg was indeed not in the restaurant, they dispersed. Yarbemia patted her chest as she said to Elizabeth, who was calmly drinking tea beside her, "It's too scary. These women come and ask so many times every day. It's as if they want to tear the restaurant down." Elizabeth took a sip of tea, and said in a cold voice, "It's okay. If they dare to do anything, they'll be dead." That's not very good. After all, they are customers, Yarbemia said softly. If they tear down the restaurant, then they are our enemies. We have to treat our enemies as coldly as the winter, Elizabeth said calmly. Yarbemia hurriedly changed the topic with a sigh, and said, "I don't know when the boss will come back. He has been gone for 2 days. It's longer than usual. Also, big sister Camilla has left. I heard that a new restaurant opened on the island recently. It's not bad, and people are lining up to eat it. Why don't we go and have a free meal today? Sure. If it's really good, we'll eat it for a month. Anyway, those lowly demons won't dare to resist. Wait for me. How can I miss out on something like a free meal?" 4 demons strode out of the 10 Kings Palace. Along the way, all the demons they met avoided them as if they had seen the plague. Those who did not dodge in time were sent flying with a kick. If they were lucky, they would have broken bones and vomited blood. If they were unlucky, they might have died on the spot. "This is the one. The Abyss Demon asked in surprise as he looked at the crayfish restaurant in front of him. Yes, this is the crayfish restaurant. I heard that it's not bad. Why? Have you been here before? The Shivara who made the suggestion nodded. A demon was killed here yesterday afternoon, so we came here. This boss is rather stubborn. This free meal might not be that good. The Abyss Demon nodded. Stubborn. Ha, a lowly demon dares to be stubborn in front of us, the Ten Kings Palace? Isn't he courting death? Don't worry, follow me. If he doesn't let us eat, I'll smash his restaurant, the Shivara said disdainfully as he strode towards the crayfish restaurant. The Abyss Demon and the Spatial Demon looked at each other and smiled cunningly. They then followed after him. The courtyard and restaurant of the crayfish restaurant were already filled with demons. The crayfish were being stir-fried in the wok, giving off an alluring aroma. What was different from yesterday was that the wok on the far right wasn't spicy crayfish. Instead, it was the so-called garlic crayfish, which was the new product launched by the boss today. The aroma wafted over slowly. All the demons craned their necks and waited anxiously. Scram! This seat is ours. At this moment, the 4 demons from the Ten Kings Palace walked in through the courtyard. The Shivara kicked the demon sitting at the table at the entrance and stepped on the chair. He looked down at the 4 demons who were lying on the ground with their hands on their chests and grinned. Any objections? Chapter 1341. I don't have any objections. That demon clutched his chest with a few broken ribs as he frantically shook his head with a pained expression. Although he had the Ten Kings Palace's protective amulet on him, the Ten Kings Palace wasn't within the amulet's range of protection. The other demons sitting at the same table also hurriedly got up and retreated. Looking at their companion lying on the ground, they didn't dare to voice their anger. Meanwhile, the originally noisy courtyard fell into dead silence. All the demons lowered their heads and didn't dare to take another look, afraid that trouble would find them. Some demons were even prepared to sneak away secretly. They didn't feel safe sitting with the fellows from the Ten Kings Palace. I have an objection. A cold female voice was heard. Who? The Shivara raised his head and came face to face with a round stool. The surface of the stool collided with that face full of holes, and the wooden chair started to crumble. That face was also rapidly deformed. His nose was flattened, his teeth were shattered, and his face shape was deformed. In that instant, many small expressions flashed across the Shivara's face. Astonishment, disdain, shock, and pain. Bam! The wooden chair crumbled into sawdust, and that Shivara, who had arrogantly stepped on the demon's chest, was also sent flying. He was pinned to a big tree 100 meters away, and only a few of his fingers could still move slightly. The 3 demons from the Ten Kings Palace turned to look at the Shivara hanging on the big tree, then at Irina, who had casually thrown the stool leg in her hand to the ground. At the same time, they took a big step back with shock in their eyes. Terrifying. The customers who had their heads lowered finally couldn't help but raise their heads to look at the beautiful lady boss who was holding the stool leg, and the Shivara demon who was sent flying by the stool. That was a 6th grade Shivara, and he was also a staff member of the Ten Kings Palace. Yet, this lady boss dared to hit him without any hesitation. It seemed like the rumor about killing a customer as a sacrifice before opening was most likely true. After all, this lady boss dared to hit even someone from the Ten Kings Palace. They wouldn't be surprised at anything she did. The abyss devil that was stomped on the ground felt that the sky had brightened up all of a sudden, and then fell into a daze. A Shivara was sent flying on Carapace Island. Wasn't this too crazy? Meg took a glance at the Shivara hanging from the tree, and raised his hand to block Amy's wand. It was indeed fun to sacrifice guests to the heavens, but it wasn't a good idea to do it every day. Moreover, they were going to stay on Carapace Island for a few days after all. Before they left, it wasn't appropriate for them to strain their relationship with the Ten Kings Palace. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. You. You actually dared to harm a member of the Ten Kings Palace. Are you planning to go against the Ten Kings Palace? Or do you want to challenge us? The spatial demon tried to put on a brave front. This female abyssal strength was probably above theirs. Moreover, she didn't follow the rules when she attacked. I'm just cleaning up some troublesome trash. Isn't this the rule set by the Ten Kings Palace? Irina's mouth curled up slightly. She looked at the spatial fiend with some ridicule and said, "Fellows who don't follow the rules will all die miserably. I heard your ancestor was killed. It's a pity that he didn't even have time to leave any family rules for you. What a misfortune for your family. You. The spatial demon's expression changed drastically. The death of the spatial demon's ancestor was a huge blow to the spatial demon race. Their position among the top 10 races dropped from 6th to 10th, and they could be replaced by other races at any time. He didn't expect this female abyssal to expose their shortcomings and mock them mercilessly. This was intolerable. Do you know the price of going against the Ten Kings Palace on Carapace Island? Not only will your shop be closed, but your entire family will also have to pay a terrible price, the Abyss Demon warned sternly as he looked at Irina coldly. They had always been able to do whatever they wanted on Carapace Island. When had they ever been so aggrieved that they were even sent flying into a tree? Bam! Irina took out another chair from somewhere and sent that Abyss Demon flying with a slap. I don't want to talk to the fat Abyss pig. Even his tone has the smell of a pig. Irina kept the chair. The quality of this chair was obviously much better as it still had a normal seat. Do the two of you have anything else to say? Irina asked coldly as she looked at the remaining two demons. How valiant. All the demon customers looked over. At this moment, they were even a little dazed. These 4 demons weren't the members of the Ten Kings Palace who did all kinds of evil on Carapace Island. They were just 4 pitiful little demons, and that beautiful lady boss was the real bully. The 2 demons swallowed their saliva at the same time. This female abyssal was simply lawless, but the most aggrieved thing was that they couldn't beat her. Go back and call for reinforcement. The 2 demons looked at each other. She was someone they couldn't beat. Therefore, the 2 demons shook their heads at the same time. Then you can scram. Irina raised her hand and sent the remaining 2 demons flying with a slap. The 4 Ten Kings Palace demons supported each other as they staggered away. Such a scene was rarely seen on Carapace Island throughout the ages. Endless applause sounded in the courtyard and on the streets. All the demons looked at Irina with eyes full of admiration and admiration. However, they also felt that it was a pity. It seemed like this delicious crayfish restaurant had to disappear after only opening for 2 days. Alright, it seems like I have to find another place to continue my crayfish business. Meg sighed in his heart. He didn't think that Irina did anything wrong, but the Ten Kings Palace was a local bully after all. If they couldn't be killed, it would be very troublesome. Let's continue eating. Irina raised her hand, and a faint green ray of light entered the chest of the demon lying on the ground. His collapsed and fractured chest quickly bulged, and the broken bones reconnected. The pain also disappeared instantly. That demon hurriedly got up from the ground and thanked Irina. However, he didn't sit down again. Instead, he called the other 3 demons at the same table and left in a hurry. I'm going out for a while, Irina said softly as she walked to Meg's side. Where are you going? To kill a few people and take some things. Irina walked past him and headed to the restaurant before going upstairs. Meg looked at the 4 Ten Kings Palace demons who hadn't disappeared from the street corner with pity. Why did they have to do this? Being a quiet foodie and having delicious crayfish at the same time. How great was that? Why did they have to do this? Not long later, a loud sound came from the center of Carapace Island. A huge black mushroom cloud rose from the area where the Ten Kings Palace was, and the entire island shook. What's going on? All the demons on Carapace Island looked in the direction of the Ten Kings Palace in shock. The Ten Kings Palace seemed to have been attacked. It's done, Irina said softly as she walked out of the restaurant. It was almost the same time as when she went to the washroom. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.